drive into Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England as well as North Wales. These showers will be accumulating over the hills with some another few centimetres of snow in places, but at lower levels it's sleet and wet snow, not causing too much trouble. Now for the far north of Scotland, Shetland in particular, there'll be some deep snow accumulating, especially on Tuesday night, risk of 5 to 10 centimetres by the end of the night, and that could cause further disruption, in particular for Shetland, where there is already a considerable amount of snow. Elsewhere across the UK, clear spells by and large, and we wake up on Wednesday to a widespread frost. Temperatures could be as low as -12 Celsius for sheltered parts of northern Scotland, where we've got a bit of snow on the ground. Otherwise, bright skies for many, and we keep the sunny spells across central and eastern parts into the afternoon. However, there is an area of rain arriving from the west, and that will turn to snow over the hills of northern England and Scotland briefly, before milder air arrives for many on Thursday and Friday.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's Patrick Christys here on GB News with you all the way through until 6 p.m. I'm going to give you a quick run-through of what I've got coming up this hour. It looks as though Gary Lineker is going to be back in the hot seat. The BBC clearly not keen on my attempts at Match of the Day, which we did on Saturday. More on that later on. So, yes, the latest on Gary Lineker. More serious stuff, though, because Fiona Bruce of the BBC, of course, has stepped back from her role as an ambassador for Refuge, which is a domestic abuse charity. I think that was potentially a bit harsh. We're going to have a look at that. The illegal migration bill is getting its second reading in the House of Commons. We're hoping to take that live. Of course, that is a massively contentious bill. We'll be looking at all of that. And the Falklands. Yes, could we be returning to some kind of Falklands war? I think that's probably a little bit inflammatory, but they're not happy with us. There is also, as well, some clips doing the rounds of me doing my Gary Lineker impression on our alternative Match of the Day on Saturday night, which I must say was probably the most fun I've ever had on television. Hopefully we can play you a couple of those very, very shortly. Yes, it's fair to say that Gary Lineker's job is safe for numerous different reasons, but right here on GB News on Saturday night, we basically endeavoured to just take the mickey out of everyone, including ourselves a little bit as well, which some people appear to have missed slightly on social media, but there we go. I believe we've got some highlights, or should they be lowlights?
This is the alternative Match of the Day, live on GB News, with me, Mark Dolan, and Patrick Christys. Patrick, go easy on those crisps.
Salah, though, missed a penalty, slotted it into a different postcode. Had more misses than Henry VIII this season, that lad. I mean, look at this guy here, Erling Haaland. I mean, he's just like a particularly muscular horse, isn't he? He looks like a Viking on the rampage. Yeah, that insightful analysis there from me. Anyway, look, get your emails coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. How do you feel about the Lineker situation, etc.? And are the Falklands British? Why not toss a bit of red meat out there? But now, it's your headlines with the wonderful Tamsin.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 3 minutes past 3. 3 people have been taken to hospital after a suspected gas explosion in Swansea, with 1 person unaccounted for. Emergency services are at the scene after being called to the Morriston area this morning. Police say 2 properties have been extensively damaged and neighbouring buildings have also been affected. They've set up a cordon and are asking the public to avoid the area. Local council leader Rob Stewart told GB News teams are working to secure the site.
You're in the street here, you can certainly smell gas in terms of, the remembrance of the explosion. It's also disturbed the electricity supply in the area. This looks like a localised incident. And, certainly the area of Morriston is a modern area, and there's no suggestion of any sort of infrastructural issues at the present time.
TV presenter Gary Lineker has been reinstated to Match of the Day after reaching an agreement with the BBC. It's after he was taken off air over a tweet on the government's illegal migration bill. The BBC Director General has apologised and said the corporation is launching an independent review of its social media guidelines. The board has welcomed the move, saying impartiality is a cornerstone of the BBC. Speaking to the BBC, Director General Tim Davie said he thinks he's done the right thing.
I've always said we need to take proportionate action. For some people, by the way, we've taken too severe action, David. Others think we're being too lenient. One of the joys of this affair is there'd never been an easy solution, but asking Gary to step back off air was, I think, a significant thing. And now we look forward with this agreement moving forward to resolve things and get back to business as usual.
Former BBC executive and presenter Roger Bolton questioned why the BBC chairman hasn't spoken out on the matter.
Rightly or wrongly, Richard Sharp, because of his connections with Boris Johnson, because of the fact that he's been investigated for that relationship and what he revealed about it, and because he was almost totally absent, well, not almost, he was totally absent this weekend when the DG needed some help. He didn't step up, he didn't talk about impartiality, probably because he knew the second question people like you would put to him was, can we talk about your links to Boris Johnson?
The Chancellor and the Bank of England have secured the sale of collapsed Silicon Valley Bank UK to HSBC for a nominal sum of £1. The UK branch was put into insolvency last night after the California-based parent company had its assets seized by US regulators on Friday. Jeremy Hunt says the government had worked urgently to look after the tech sector. More than 200 companies were facing risks to cash flow before the intervention, with around £2.5 billion in capital locked in the lender.
All those really important companies that had deposits with Silicon Valley Bank UK can access their deposits, can access normal banking services as of this morning. It's a very important outcome. No taxpayers' money has been used, and I think it's a result of a lot of hard work. But I also think it shows that the UK has great resilience in its financial system, that we're able to step in with one of our biggest UK banks in a situation like this and protect a very important sector.
Junior doctors are mounting picket lines outside hospitals for 3 days of industrial action. The British Medical Association says junior doctors in England have suffered a 26% real terms cut to their pay since 2008. The union says newly qualified medics earn just over £14 an hour, less than some baristas in coffee shops. The Health Secretary Steve Barclay says their demands of a 35% rise are unaffordable.
We're working extremely hard with NHS England and with hospital bosses to mitigate the impact of the junior doctor strike. That is why it's important that we engage in meaningful and constructive talks with them. We stand ready to engage with the junior doctors on that in exactly the same way we have with other health unions. And I urge the junior doctors to come and have those discussions as the other health unions have been doing, so we can pause the strikes and discuss those issues.
Britain set to be hit by further wintry blasts, with 51 flood alerts in place across the UK. The Met Office has issued a yellow warning for strong winds across parts of England and Wales, with gusts of up to 65 miles per hour forecast and travel disruption expected. In Scotland, yellow warnings for snow and ice are in place until tomorrow morning, as temperatures plunge to -8 degrees there over the weekend. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now back to Patrick.
Right, loads to get through then, people. And a reminder that we hope to hear from Home Secretary Suella Braverman talking about the government's illegal migration bill a little later this hour, hopefully about half an hour, actually. But we start with a hugely embarrassing day for the BBC, who have apologised to Gary Lineker after the disputes over his tweet about the government's migration policy. Now, GB News understands that a number of BBC Sport staff are unhappy with the corporation's Director-General, Tim Davie. BBC Sport is based in Salford, and employees are angry that Davie is not in the Northwest today. So Lineker will present Match of the Day this Saturday, and how on earth he's managed to keep the job after my attempt at the weekend is beyond me, and I think we can all agree he's a lucky boy indeed. But after missing the show over the weekend, anyway, his controversial tweet about Suella Braverman, where he compared her language to that used in Nazi Germany, led to a row over BBC impartiality. We all know the story by now. It's been doing the rounds left, right and centre. Many of Lineker's colleagues refused to appear on football shows on BBC television and radio. That was in solidarity with the presenter, and the BBC will now conduct a review of its social media policy. Tim Davie says Lineker will abide by the editorial guidelines until that is complete, and the Beeb's Director of Sport, Barbara Slater, is holding meetings with staff today. Lineker, for what it's worth, has tweeted about it. I'm going to go now, though, to our national reporter, Ellie Costello, for the latest, live from New Broadcasting House. Ellie, thank you very much. Great to have you at the top of the show. Look, what is the latest, then? It appears to be quite an embarrassing day for the Beeb. A lot going on.
Yes, Patrick, a lot going on in that building behind me, but a deal has been made between the BBC and Gary Lineker. He will be returning to our screens this weekend to present Match of the Day, and it must be said it was a pretty bruising weekend for the BBC. There was a snap poll out over the weekend by YouGov. 53% of people said that the BBC hadn't handled this row correctly. They said that Gary Lineker should never have been taken off air. Perhaps that's one of the reasons why they moved so quickly in order to resolve this issue. Well, Director General Tim Davie gave a statement this morning, and in it said that Gary is a valued part of the BBC and he knows how much the BBC means to Gary as well. They look forward to Gary presenting the coverage of Match of the Day this weekend. And Tim Davie also went on to announce a new independent review into the BBC's social media guidelines, and there will be a particular focus on freelancers who are working outside of news and current affairs. That does directly impact on Gary Lineker. And he also recognised that in the current social media policy, there are grey areas that do need addressing. Tim Davie did say that in the meantime, whilst that independent review goes on, Gary Lineker has agreed to stick to the current social media guidance. But it must be said, Gary Lineker hasn't confirmed this yet, and after it was announced that deal had been made between the BBC and Gary Lineker, he took to Twitter and wrote a thread on his personal Twitter page. I'm going to share some of that with you now. He says, after a surreal few days, I'm delighted that we have navigated a way through this. And he wants to thank his colleagues at BBC Sport for their show of solidarity. He says he's very proud to work for the BBC, that he describes as the best and fairest broadcaster in the world. But he goes on to say a final thought, which is this: however difficult the last few days have been, it simply doesn't compare to having to flee your home from persecution or war to seek refuge in a land far away. It's heartwarming to have seen the empathy towards their plight from so many of you. We remain a country of predominantly tolerant, welcoming and generous people. Thank you. So it is very interesting that just moments after news of that deal was broken, Gary Lineker did take the opportunity to double down on his comments that he made last Tuesday. Those comments that did snowball really into this row about freedom of expression and also impartiality at the BBC. But he very much stands firm by those comments. But it does seem as though it was a respectful, mutual agreement between the BBC and Tim Davie. Gary Lineker described Tim Davie as being very understanding during this very difficult period. So he will be back on air this weekend, Patrick, and it looks as though for the meantime he is going to continue to keep tweeting.
Yeah, look, Ellie, thank you very much. Now, I understand that there might be another slight issue at the BBC as well relating to Fiona Bruce. Is that correct? Could you just bring us up to date on that, please?
Yes, this is a story that has broken in just the past few hours, and it concerns an episode of Question Time that went out last Thursday. The presenter of Question Time, Fiona Bruce, has faced backlash after stepping in when a guest on her show described Stanley Johnson, the father of Boris Johnson, as a wife beater. And they were talking about Boris Johnson's resignation honours list and the potential that Stanley Johnson could be on it in order to get a knighthood. And Fiona Bruce interjected when her guest described him as a wife-beater, and she gave some context. She said that, speaking to a journalist, Tom Bauer, she said that Stanley Johnson had broken her nose. This is what Stanley Johnson's ex-wife had said, and that she'd ended up in hospital as a result. Fiona Bruce said Stanley Johnson has not commented publicly on that. Friends of his have said it did happen, but that it was a one-off. And those comments, the comments saying that it was just a one-off, were criticised by many women's charities, including Women's Aid, who called it unnecessary. They said that even if abuse is an isolated event, which it very rarely is, it should never be minimised. Well, Fiona Bruce has now stepped down as ambassador of the charity Refuge, which is a domestic violence charity, and she's given a statement which says that she was just legally contextualising a question about Stanley Johnson. She said they were not an expression of her own opinion and they were not minimising domestic abuse. She says she would never do that. She says she's faced a social media storm, she's been mischaracterised and she has received personal abuse, and she said it's a very hard decision, but she has decided to just remain an active supporter on the sidelines for now. But Patrick, again, it just highlights, doesn't it, the complexities around BBC presenters and their wording and their language, not only on air but off air as well, on their own social media accounts. And there is going to be a focus now, an independent review about how they're going to keep impartiality at the BBC. But once again, this case highlights, doesn't it, just how difficult and just how challenging that's going to be.
Yes, Ellie, thank you very, very much. Ellie Costello there, our national reporter outside Broadcasting House, bringing you up to date with two stories there. The first of which is something we're returning to now, and it's the Gary Lineker saga. A sporting perspective on this story by Tom Arnott, who is a football journalist with The Times. Thank you very much, Tom. Great to have you on the show. Right, so it would appear, anyway, that Lineker has had some kind of full frontal apology and will be there in solidarity, of course, with the other people who decided to pull out over the weekend. What's your take on what's happened and where we are now?
Well, I think it's obviously gone on longer than perhaps people would have expected in the beginning. I think the BBC has obviously taken a lot of criticism. Gary Lineker has definitely come out of it seemingly more popular, with most of the weight of public opinion behind him, it seems. And I think all parties will now be very relieved to move on, really, and put this behind them. And of course, there will be this inquiry into trying to find a sort of a better solution going forward for the BBC around their social media guideline. I think in terms of Match of the Day, in terms of BBC Sport, everyone will be fairly relieved just now to move on.
Do you think this does prove that Gary Lineker is just too big to cancel?
I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think basically, I think people have considered the principles here, and it's obviously quite complicated in terms of the intricacies of impartiality, in terms of who can say what, whether it's a journalist who's on BBC News or in BBC Sport, whether they're freelance or full-time. There are various factors here to consider. And I think, you know, in the current climate with social media, impartiality is a very difficult thing to strike. I mean, you know, we all know now that opinions are more extreme than ever, that to get attention, to get limelight, you have to have opinions that are seemingly, you know, at one end of the spectrum or the other, and sometimes finding the sort of the middle ground of impartiality in that context can be difficult, and that's what the BBC are wrestling with, and perhaps now they are going to have to update their guidelines and bring them more into line with the current climate.
Look, Tom, thank you very much for that perspective. Tom Arnott there, who is a football journalist with The Times. A couple of bits on this, of course, is that Gary Lineker does appear to have kept his job and had an apology. I do strongly suspect that the output that I delivered in alternative Match of the Day on Saturday night Essentially went to go a long way to show that Gary Lineker is maybe worth every single penny, but there we go. We did have an absolutely cracking laugh, to be fair. I did enjoy it thoroughly. Also, the Sunday Times, did a write-up about me on Sunday, which did say that I was the equivalent of 3 Staffordshire nightclub bouncers rolled into one, which I thought was brilliant. There were also glimpses of praise there. In case you're wondering what I'm on about as well, our alternative match of the day coverage aired from 10 to 11. I mean, it actually, for the most part, was fantastically well received, actually. We were laughing at everyone, including ourselves. I do have a couple of little clips of it to play for you right now. And this, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, will not be replacing the real match of the day on the BBC. It's a shocker. It's an outrage.
This is the alternative match of the day, live on GB News with me, Mark Dolan, and Patrick Christys. Patrick, go easy on those crisps.
Salah, though, missed a penalty, slotted it into a different postcode. Had more misses than Henry VIII this season, that lad. I mean, look at this guy here, Erling Haaland. I mean, he's just like a particularly muscular horse, isn't he? He looks like a Viking on the rampage. Yeah, there we go. I mean, the mind boggles, doesn't it? The mind boggles. Anyway, right, OK. So the House of Commons is to hold the second reading debate on the government's new illegal migration bill later today. Just last week, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, announced the legislation would allow for the removal of channel migrants from the UK. So, under the proposals, those attempting to cross the water would be banned from future re-entry and blocked from applying for British citizenship. Braverman said the bill would push the boundaries of international law, but that it was needed to solve the crisis. I am joined now by GB News' political reporter Catherine Forster. Catherine, thank you very much. Now, shortly we're hoping to go live to the Commons and get some of this. What can we expect?
So it's having the second reading of this bill this afternoon, and there's going to be a vote this evening, which the government will certainly win. But this issue, as we know, is incredibly complex. People feel very strongly about it. And obviously, Labour are opposing it. Keir Starmer said, yes, we need to stop the trade, the traffickers, but this is not the right way. Some Conservatives think it doesn't go far enough, people like Ian Duncan-Smith, people that would like to tackle the ECHR head-on. Other Conservatives, people like Caroline Noakes, who used to be an immigration minister, have said, I can't vote for this, because they're worried about the fact that children potentially would be detained and deported and criminalised effectively. Now, that won't apply to single children arriving, but it would apply to families, potentially. So, but what's clear is that Rishi Sunak is very keen to rush this through as fast as possible, because having made that pledge, one of his 5 priorities, stopping the boats, given that the numbers are just going up and up and up, they really need to have turned this around and have something serious to show by the next election, don't they? Yeah,
well, they do indeed. And I can't help but wonder as well, Catherine, whether or not it's actually in Labour's interest, aside from just a moral perspective, from a political perspective, it's in everyone's political interest, unless you're a Tory, to make sure this doesn't happen. Because Rishi Sunak has made such a big deal out of stop the boats that if at the next election Labour can go, well, you see, he's not stopped the boats, there might be a weird public psychology experiment that takes place where they go, well, I know that this guy tried to stop the boats but it didn't happen. I know that this guy doesn't particularly seem to want to stop the boats, but because I didn't get what I wanted from Sunak, I'll vote for Starmer anyway, if that makes sense.
And Labour are now, although they've been traditionally seen as being soft on immigration, they are very keen to say, this is a terrible trade, we have to stop this, but this isn't the way. And of course, Rishi Sunak, having said, we will stop the boats. The problem for the government is this is all happening on their watch. They've had 13 years in power. And OK, going back a few years, people used to cross the channel illegally in lorries, smuggled in that way. But this is so visible because we're seeing it day after day, these people coming across the channel in small boats, and the numbers have rocketed. And there's some projections that potentially 80,000 people might cross illegally this year, if something isn't done urgently. Now, the other side of it, apart from the legislation, which is going to face trouble in the Lords and obviously with the courts, is the £480 million that we've now pledged to spend with France.
Yes.
And the thinking that, OK, we've already given them a couple of $100 million over the last few years, but the French say they're stopping about half the boats from taking off. If they can get it up to 75%, then at that point they think that's a tipping point and that would break the smugglers' business model.
Yes, indeed. All right, so just give us a quick run-through of when we're expecting potentially to hear all this take place in the House of Commons.
So that the debate will be starting in the next hour or so. I imagine it will go on for quite some time, and then there'll be a vote on it tonight, the government will win that vote.
Right.
And then it will go to committee stage and they will mull it over. But it'll be interesting to see how much it changes between now and when it finally emerges the other side of the House of Lords.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Look, Catherine, thank you very, very much. Catherine Forster there, our political guru, political reporter, whizzing you through the latest on the illegal migrant bill. Now, like I said, yes, we are going to be going live at some point anyway to the House of Commons. But yes, there's a few news of a few extra £5 million apparently being spent on defence. That's right. So we'll bring you up to date on that as well. Yes, so just to clarify, there is news today of an extra £5 billion being spent on defence. I'm Patrick Christys. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back, everybody. Now, the British shopping basket has morphed over the years, with some of you trading in packs of cigarettes and AUKUS pops for frozen berries and e-bikes. It's certainly not the case around at my house. But that's according to new figures from the Office for National Statistics, and the ONS collects thousands of prices across the goods to calculate the rising cost of living and monthly inflation figures. And here to break it down for us, amongst other things, actually, is our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Let's talk about people's shopping baskets first, shall we, Liam? What's in them?
So the Office for National Statistics, it follows about 750 different goods and services. The prices of those, that's what feed into the inflation number. The next inflation number is coming out next Wednesday. But just to give you viewers a little bit of insight, every year they change some of the goods. So when I was a lad, it was sort of spam and bird's eye beef burgers. When you were a lad, it was chicken nuggets. Yeah. And of course, because things go in fashion, particularly consumer goods, things we eat, services that we use. And I just thought I'd bring a little bit of insight. It's quite interesting. If you look at how the goods have changed, I've put some of them on a graphic here for you. Now, what they've taken out this year, Alco Pops, which you were probably weaned on, Patrick. Then cooking apples, because people don't make stewed apple like they used to. I like a bit of stewed apple, though. Digital compact cameras. You don't need them anymore because you've got a phone, right?
Why has it been in it for this long?
Yeah, and then vending machines, soft drinks, because there aren't as many vending machines around as there used to be because we're not using as much cash. So that is changing. Maybe they'll come back in when those kind of vending machines you use where you just put your card and sound effect there. Now, there's some of the 16 goods that have been taken away, and I'll give you some examples of some of the goods that have been put in, that have been added. So we've got e-bikes, right? Frozen berries. Not that you eat any of them, but keep you regular. Then you've got sound bars, the things that you sort of lash up underneath your television. You can, Bluetooth your phones to them, things like that. And then home security cameras. They've also added in, Patrick, green beans and red wine. And though the rumours aren't true, that it isn't just my personal consumption that's led to... But look, this is sort of living economic sociology, isn't it? We consume different things, and each year the ONS, which, I knock it sometimes on GB News, it is one of the best statistical bodies in the world. Many countries follow what the ONS is doing. It invented a lot of these economic measurement concepts. And so some goods come in every year and some goods come out. This is not about manipulating the numbers. This is not about trying to pretend that inflation is less than it is. There are other things that the ONS can do that, in my view. This is just about changing the basket of goods that the average consumer uses. And it's not just goods, it's services as well.
Well, when it comes to things like cooking apples or Alka Pops, there must be a longer track record of what those things cost over a longer period of time, I would imagine, than e-bikes. I mean, I obviously don't ride an e-bike. I don't know why I said obviously, although apart from my appearance, maybe. But I don't ride an e-bike. But I don't think... They've certainly not been around as long as cooking apples, have they? So how can they accurately measure inflation based on something that might have fluctuated massively since its conception?
Because they are... The thing about e-bikes is obviously they haven't been around very long, but suddenly they're all the rage, as my mum would say. Suddenly they are now... Not the average person uses an e-bike, but it's not unusual to use an e-bike. If you go on holiday these days, you're just as likely to hire an e-bike in some resorts as you are to hire a regular push bike. And the same things with sound bars. And also CDs and DVDs. They've taken out CDs and DVDs unless they're CDs, or because they do still sell CDs and DVDs, that are in the top 10 or top 20 in terms of popularity. So those kind of back catalogue CDs and DVDs that people would buy to build their collections, of course, no one's doing that anymore. Only a few kind of, specialist collectors. So they've taken them out. It's interesting, and this happens every single year. This is a normal thing. And I thought particularly interesting were the ones that I've highlighted, not least Alka Pops going out. And I see this in my own family. Kids were drinking Alka Pops a lot these days, but kids I know the same age now, they're not. They're drinking different things.
No, absolutely spot on, 100%. And I think we've just got time quickly for something we're going to talk a bit more about later on, actually. But, yes, we've done something with a bank in America, haven't we?
Yeah, this is really, really important. It had a deal happened over the weekend, and if that deal hadn't have happened, Patrick, we'd be talking wall to wall about this situation. So there's a bank in the US called Silicon Valley Bank. It's a bank used by a lot of the tech companies, and it's got a UK offshoot here, Silicon Valley Bank UK. The US part of the bank went bust. So what the Treasury, Jeremy Hunt, the Bank of England, over the weekend, they got together, and HSBC, which is Europe's biggest bank, another British bank, bought the UK subsidiary of Silicon Valley Bank. Now, that means that the tech companies in the UK, with money in that bank, they can just carry on as normal. They've just got a different bank, but all their banking systems work. They can pay their employees and all the rest of it. Had that purchase by HSBC not gone ahead, had that bank been rendered insolvent, you would have had then a lot of fear about the health of other banks. You could have had people queuing up outside banks, as we had in 2008 with Northern Rock. The whole banking system is just a confidence pyramid. And if there's a sense that banks are starting to go insolvent, then that is really, really bad. And, fair play to the Treasury, Bank of England, again, I kick them in the shins from time to time. They did a good job over the weekend by getting that deal together. So that means we only have to mention it every now and then on GB News, and gives you time to talk about Gary Lineker and Match of the Day and all the rest of it.
Yes.
But worryingly, since the US markets opened, the share price of some other banks has absolutely plummeted because there are fears that the issues which affected the Silicon Valley Bank may be affecting some other banks too. So look, for now it looks as if it's a bullet that's been dodged, but it may be that there are other concerns in the next few days that will then dominate the budget on the 15th of March, Wednesday the 15th of March.
Fascinating stuff. Liam, thank you very, very much. Liam Halligan there, our economics and business editor with On the Money. Right, OK, loads more still to come between now and 4 o'clock. We've got news of a £5 billion increase in defence spending, which I think is possibly quite needed. And is Argentina going to invade the Falkland Islands again? Probably not, but find out why I'm asking that question about the UK's relations with the South American country have taken a turn for the worse. Argentina not happy with us, that's fair to say, but we're going to go over it now. Forget your latest headlines with the wonderful Tamsin Roberts.
Patrick, thank you. It's 3:33. Here are the headlines. 3 people have been taken to hospital after a suspected gas explosion in Swansea, with 1 person unaccounted for. Emergency services are at the scene after being called to the Morriston area this morning. Police say 2 properties have been extensively damaged and neighbouring buildings have also been affected. They've set up a cordon and are asking the public to avoid the area. TV presenter Gary Lineker has been reinstated to Match of the Day after reaching an agreement with the BBC. It's after he was taken off air over a tweet on the government's illegal migration bill. The BBC Director General has apologised and said the corporation is launching an independent review of its social media guidelines. The board has welcomed the move, saying impartiality is a cornerstone of the BBC. The Chancellor and the Bank of England have secured the sale of the collapsed Silicon Valley Bank UK to HSBC. The UK branch was put into insolvency last night after the California-based parent company had its assets seized by US regulators on Friday. Jeremy Hunt has confirmed all customer deposits would be protected with no cost to the taxpayer. The Prime Minister has pledged £5 billion over 2 years to the armed forces. Rishi Sunak met with his Australian counterpart, Anthony Albanese, in San Diego, ahead of unveiling a major new AUKUS defence pact between the UK, US and Australia. Plans to be announced with US President Joe Biden include supplying nuclear-powered submarines to Australia. Junior doctors are staging 3 days of industrial action. The British Medical Association says staff in England have suffered a 26% real terms cut to their pay since 2008. The union says newly qualified medics earn just over £14 an hour, less than some baristas in coffee shops. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Patrick.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. Now, shortly-ish, we're going to be going to the House of Commons. It's that second reading of the Tories' illegal migration bill, so we'll keep you informed about all of that. Some time for a bit of emails now, actually, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Lots of you getting in touch on that development that happened today, which is essentially that the BBC appear to have, one way or another, apologised to Gary Lineker, and he's back in the hot seat, and so will all of his colleagues be. Loads of you getting in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Abby's been on to say that she never watched the original Match of the Day, but did have rather a large laugh at my particular version over the weekend. Alternative Match of the Day, yes, thank you very much. I would urge you to go and check that out. It was, look, I mean, I had an absolutely great time doing it, to be honest with you. Just unbelievable chaos, but there we go. But what she goes on to say is that Gary Lineker's opinion on footy is anything, is fine, but people seem to be missing the Holocaust reference, and she thinks that's what's out of order, and that is alluding to the fact that, of course, Gary Lineker made reference to the Tory rhetoric sounding like something out of 1930s Germany. We all know what happened there. The BBC is a joke, and this is from a man called Padge, who says, now was the time to get rid of him as he's overpaid and his cronies. So there we go. Interesting, isn't it? Of course, the viewing figures did go up. I suspect that was more out of curiosity than anything. I've got loads of these coming your way. Also, some emails coming in about the Falkland Islands. That's something we're going to be talking about a little bit later on. We've got Mark White and his fantastic package, for want of a better phrase. He is reviewing where the Falkland Islands are at. It is, of course, 10 years since a referendum on whether or not they should remain British, which ended favourably for the Brits, of course. But also, as well, looking at the fact that the Argentinians appear to be quite moody about the situation. Not for the first time. They've ripped up an international agreement that they had with us and are kicking up rather a stink, leading us to all wonder whether or not there is going to be some kind of Falklands war, which ties into another story that we're doing, £5 billion extra for defence. Keep your emails coming in, like Gary, who's been on, no, not that Gary, who's been on to say, Patrick, the Falklands are, always have been and always will be British. And he goes on to say something rather nasty about the Argentinians, which I will not read out. Keep your views coming in, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Rishi Sunak has promised to spend an extra £5 billion on the military over the next 2 years. Is that enough, though, in these dark and bleak times? I'm Patrick Christys. This is GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
OK, welcome back. Now, Argentina has been accused of placing the Falklands in an economic stranglehold after it ripped up a key cooperation agreement and demanded fresh talks on the island's sovereignty. It comes as islanders mark the 10th anniversary of a referendum vote to remain British. Our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, has more.
Across the Falklands, they're marking a decade since they voted by a staggering 99.8% to remain British. Although overseen by international observers, the results of that referendum have never been recognised by the Argentinian government. 7 years ago, Buenos Aires and London effectively agreed to disagree over the island's sovereignty and signed up to a pact aimed at improving economic, environmental and social relations. But this week, all that ended as the Argentinians ripped up the agreement and demanded fresh talks over the future of the Falklands.
We're always disappointed with the reaction from Argentina, but we're not at all surprised. It's something that we've come to live with, and we understand them very, very clearly. When the economy and when the political situation in Argentina gets tough, then we are the sort of whipping boys from their point of view.
The Argentinian economy is in meltdown. Critics of the government in Buenos Aires accuse it of reigniting the row over Falkland sovereignty to distract from its domestic troubles. On a practical level, though, any withdrawal from the cooperation agreement will hurt the islands.
It has impacted the Falklands because we can't share fisheries data with Argentina because of the migration of the fish stock in the ocean. We've lost a flight to Sao Paulo, which was our second link to South America. And also the agreement benefited Argentina because it helped identify the war dead from the war. So I don't really think anyone comes out better from this agreement coming to an end.
With more than 1,000 British military personnel, Typhoon fighters and a Royal Navy presence, the Falklands is far better defended now than before the war in '82. No one here believes Argentina has the slightest interest or indeed capability to threaten the islands militarily. But for the time being at least, it seems determined to ramp up the diplomatic and economic pressure despite the express wish of this island community. Mark White, GB News.
Well, there we go. I'm delighted to say that Mark White managed to get back to us here from the Falkland Islands incredibly quickly. He joins me in the studio right now. Mark, fantastic journey back, I imagine. But, no, look, seriously, should we be concerned about posturing from the Argentinians, or is this all just hot air?
Well, I don't think anybody seriously considers that Argentina will be any time soon planning to launch another military escapade to the Falkland Islands, Las Malvinas, as they describe these islands. They're just not in a fit state to do that militarily, even if they were minded to do that. This is a pattern that we get with Argentina every time they go in the economic cycle where effectively their economy tanks, they're doing badly in the polls. The Falklands Islands as an issue resonates well with their populace and is a bit of a distraction.
Yeah, it is, but I don't quite understand how it still does, because the last time they really tried it on, they got sent home packing, didn't they?
Well, yes, and I mean, in terms of the sort of way in which the islands are defended now, much more robust defence in the Falklands than it was in '82, when there were really just a few dozen Royal Marines who were based there guarding Governor House. But now, of course, we've got Mount Pleasant military base, 1,000 military personnel, squadron of Typhoon fighters, Royal Navy presence. So if there was anything like that, God forbid, they would, I'm sure, be able to answer that.
Fantastic. Mark, thank you very, very much. Mark White there, our Home and Security Editor, bringing you up to date with the Falkland Islands and the fact that they are very much still British and hopefully continue to be so. Rishi Sunak has insisted, though, that the UK's armed forces has the funding they need for a more volatile world, as he's promised the military an extra £5 billion in funding over 2 years. Now, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace is said to be delighted, despite the amount being only around half of what he reportedly demanded. I suppose that's how negotiations work, though, isn't it? And a major defence deal could be on the cards. Now, Rishi Sunak is currently stateside, meeting with President Joe Biden and the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, and that is in relation to the AUKUS deal, which is of huge significance globally, actually. Joining me now is the defence editor of The Telegraph and fan favourite here on GB News. It's Cotton Coughlin. Cotton, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Let's deal with first things first. Defence spending right here at home to prepare us for a more volatile world. Is £5 billion enough? Where's it going to go?
Well, I think that the military is grateful for any extra money it gets from the government, but frankly, this is nothing more than a sticking plaster. 3 billion of the 5 billion will go on supporting our submarine building programme, which, like so many other programmes, has fallen well behind, and they've been embarrassed into doing this because, as you said, they're just about to sign this deal to build a new fleet of nuclear-powered submarines for the Australians. So if we can't even build our own submarines, then how are we to build the Australian submarines? So that's a big question. And the rest of the money is just going to replenish the weapon stocks that have been depleted through our support of Ukraine. So, yeah, I think privately, Ben Wallace is going to be disappointed. You know, he was looking for 11 billion. And what this money doesn't do is it doesn't address the structural problems we have in the armed forces, not least with our army. A very senior general over the weekend confirmed that, you know, if the British army had been fighting in Ukraine in this conflict against Russia, we'd have run out of men and equipment by now, which is a pretty sorry state of affairs for a country that aspires to be one of the leading military powers in NATO and Europe.
Yeah, indeed. Now, Con, I'm just going to ask you, sorry about this, but just going to ask you to sit there for a quick second. We're going to go live now, I believe, to the Commons, where James Cleverly is talking, as I understand it anyway, about defence.
We have
spending.
seen
There
off
we go.
competition from countries that wish to do us no good. We were able to do so because the United Kingdom has always had more allies and better allies than any of our rivals or competitors. This will always be the policy of this government to ensure that remains the case, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Foreign Secretary.
We'll obviously get more details on that as and when it comes to us. But, Con, the £5 billion, of course, is much needed, but unfortunately you're saying that it's not enough, Con. And so maybe we could do with a little bit more. I hope we can bring Con Coughlin back in. Yes, so there we go. We'll bring you more detail on what James Cleverly had to say there. But, yes, so basically the £5 billion, how much of this is just going to be mopping up what we've already essentially given to Ukraine in order to have Ukraine defend itself against the Russians?
Well, nearly half is the answer.
Right.
But as I was saying earlier, this money does not address the structural problems all the armed forces have. The Navy don't have enough warships. The RAF doesn't have enough fighters. You just referred to the squadron that's down in the Falklands. But we are very short of warplanes. So we had about 200 plus when the Tories came to power in 2010. We've got half that number now, and the threats have increased. So these are the sort of issues we've got to look at. And there was a lot of speculation in the build-up to this announcement that the government was going to reverse its decision to cut the army down to its lowest size since the Napoleonic Wars. I mean, how ludicrous is this? We're in the middle of the worst security crisis Europe has faced since the Second World War, and we are cutting the strength of our army. We are cutting the number of tanks, artillery pieces, etc. I mean, this is just madness. So despite what Rishi Sunak is doing in San Diego today with the AUKUS deal, this is all about submarines. Well, submarines are very useful. They're mainly an intelligence gathering asset, apart from being able to fire missiles. But when it comes to hard fighting equipment, we are desperately short. And I don't think the Prime Minister is really addressing this issue seriously.
Yeah, and the actual AUKUS deal, I mean, initially, I think it caught a few of our allies by surprise, including the French, didn't it? I know Rishi Sunak was over there at the weekend. Sunak's on tour, isn't he, at the minute? He was in France and now he's in San Diego. And but yeah, it did catch the French by surprise, didn't it? And what, essentially, for anyone who's just joining us, really, or has been living on the moon with their fingers in the air, what is the AUKUS deal and why is it important?
Well, it is a very important deal, and Boris Johnson deserves a lot of credit for getting this over the line. It's a deal between the US, Britain, and Australia to provide the Australians with a new fleet of nuclear-powered submarines, which will allow them to contain the threat China poses in the Pacific region. That's fundamentally what it's about. The French thought that they had to deal with the Australians to build the submarines, but the French were offering diesel-powered submarines, which were not considered fit for the challenges of the 2030s when they come into service. So Britain, with the help of the Americans, gazumped the French, and the French were very, very upset. And the Entente Cordiale went out the window for a few months. But we're back on track. And I think what you will see, actually, would be very interesting, is that AUKUS is going to expand. I think you'll see, because these are three members of the Five Eyes Security Alliance. And I think you will see Canada certainly join this soon. And there's a lot of speculation that Japan could be brought in, because Japan has just announced a massive increase in its military budget, the kind of increase we should be authorizing to deal with China. We need to deal with matters more close to home. But, we are living in a dangerous time. We need properly funded armed forces.
OK, Con, thank you very much. Wonderful insight there. Con Coughlin there, who is the defence editor of The Telegraph. Right, now, it's something completely different to the story we've just been covering there. An image has emerged of convicted pop paedophile Gary Glitter browsing a smartphone, and perhaps more alarmingly, footage has been obtained by the son of the pop paedophile asking about access to the dark web. Now, it's reportedly sparked a furious reaction from his victims and has raised many questions about the decision to release Gary Glitter after he had served only half of his 16-year sentence for historical sexual abuse of 3 girls. Catherine Hallisley is a senior associate in the abuse team at Hugh James Solicitors, and she joins me now. Look, thank you very very much. Great to have you on the show. I mean, I was deeply alarmed by this, and I think a lot of people will be surprised, A, that Gary Glitter had been released, but we covered that at the time, B, that he has access to a smartphone, and C, that he can apparently use that to scour the dark web.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is frankly terrifying, not just for the public and the risk that he poses to the public and to children, but also horrifying for the victims that he's perpetrated abuse upon. In my view, he should be immediately recalled to prison.
On that, I mean, look, we obviously are not privy to the exact conditions of Gary Glitter's release, but one would imagine, Kathleen, that convicted sex offenders, certainly of the ilk of Gary Glitter, should probably be banned from accessing the internet and certainly the dark web. Would you not thought that was something they should do?
I mean, I would think that that would be pretty obvious. I know that certainly mobile phones are provided to offenders when they're released, and I think that that's fairly reasonable, but it doesn't mean that he needs to have a smartphone. In fact, there's no reason that he couldn't have some simple kind of throwaway pay-as-you-go or brick phone, so to speak, as it is often called. And he absolutely should not have a smartphone. And frankly, they should be restricting and monitoring, as I hope they're doing, any type of access that he has to the internet whatsoever.
Yeah, I've got two further questions for you on this. I will ask, I think, maybe the most emotive one first, which is about victims, OK? And when victims see images of Gary Glitter being released and on a phone and having some jovial conversation about accessing the dark web, I mean, I think it's quite a straightforward idea as to what kind of material he might want to look at. Otherwise, why wouldn't you just use the internet, right? So how does it make abuse victims feel? Because I think it looks as though they're just completely ignored in all of this, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that really hasn't been the focus of what we're talking about here. I mean, first of all, he was released only halfway through his sentence, and I wonder what kind of message that sends to not only the victims in this situation, but in all cases, in terms of how seriously the criminal justice system takes their complaints of abuse. And one of the other points that I would make is that being sexually abused as a child is really a lifelong sentence. And that doesn't appear to be a sentence that Gary Glitter is suffering.
No, it doesn't at all, actually, does it? And can I just ask you a question finally? Look, I know that you deal in this particular area of law a lot and in the abuse team, and it does open up this question, which was being asked when Gary Glitter was released early, and it's asked every time people, say, like Colin Pitchfork, for example, are allowed out, which is, do you think that child sex offenders can actually in any way be rehabilitated, or are we always asking for trouble by allowing them out, basically?
I think it's a really complicated question, and it certainly depends on the level of offender. I think the most serious and prolific offenders are not.
Oh, no, OK, unfortunately, we've lost Kathleen there. But there we go, we were coming to the end of that interview anyway. Kathleen Hallesley there, who is a senior associate at the abuse team at Hugh James Solicitors. Look, I saw the article over the weekend, which was Gary Glitter appeared to be looking for things on the dark web, etc. And I think it will anger a lot of people, that really, who possibly didn't think that they should have been released anyway. And realistically, what's he looking at on the dark web? I believe we might be able to go back to Kathleen, actually. Kathleen is yes, sorry about that. Thank you very much. You were answering the question as to whether or not you feel as though people like Gary Glitter can be rehabilitated. No, we're just going to leave it, OK? All right. That's all right, don't worry. Sorry, Kathleen, your audio's wrong. I know. Apologies about all this. Kathleen Hallesley there, who's Senior Associate in the abuse team at Hugh J Solicitors. Right, look, loads of you have been getting in touch. I'm going to delve into the world of my inbox now, gbviews at gbnews.uk. The vast majority of you are still getting in touch about the old Gary Lineker episode. Just to bring you up to date on that, as we understand it, there are meetings taking place at the BBC with their sports desk as it currently stands. But Gary Lineker has been offered some kind of apology, and we'll be back at it in the Match of the Day chair, and a load of people are going to come off pseudo-strike in solidarity with him. And yes, a lot of people saying that actually there was an opportunity to replace him. There is actually quite a lot of people getting in touch now, like Paul, for example, say Gary Lineker is perfectly entitled to say what he says. He is indeed a sports reporter, sports presenter, and his views about anything else don't really matter or infringe on the BBC. Lloyd has been in touch, though, and this is also quite common, to say, I'm going to cancel my TV licensing process. That's from Lloyd. I get a lot of these emails, and then I wonder if anyone actually really goes and does it. So we'll have to wait and see. Maybe send me a picture of some kind of confirmation that you have actually done that, if indeed you are minded to do so. A lot of people as well getting in touch about the idea that Gary Lineker's comments more so than anything else, the people saying that it was offensive to the Jewish community, and that's possibly should have been made a bigger deal of. We did shine a bit of a light on that with people from the Jewish Chronicle, etc., as and when it happened. Look, keep your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and I want to hear from you throughout the course of the show. I've got loads more coming this hour. Yeah, OK, Gary Lineker won his battle with the BBC. Lineker won BBC nil. He will be presenting Match of the Day again on Saturday. And the hits just keep on coming for the BBC, because another high-profile broadcaster, Fiona Bruce, is at the centre of a controversy there. We'll bring that to you very, very shortly. This is GB News. I am Patrick Christys. Don't you dare move.
Hello, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. Winter bites back over the next 24 hours with colder air pushing south, wintry showers accompanying the cold air as well, but also some clear spells and some sunshine emerging by Tuesday. It's been a cloudy, mild and windy day for many on Monday. The cold air in the far north of Scotland, though, is pushing its way south as low pressure clears to the east. There is a band of rain, though, moving south across England and Wales. That will continue during Monday evening and into the early hours. Then the cold air arrives, and we're seeing showers of sleet and snow affect Scotland and Northern Ireland already. They'll push into central parts of England and Wales overnight. Most of the snow accumulating above 200 metres. Some icy patches at lower levels because there'll be a widespread frost across the northern two-thirds of the UK, as low as -10 Celsius for sheltered parts of northern Scotland. Milder further south, but here we've got some cloud and some rain showers pushing through during the first part of Tuesday morning. Brighter skies then follow, sunny spells for many, but further wintry showers will arrive into Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England as well as North Wales. These showers will be accumulating over the hills with some another few centimetres of snow in places, but at lower levels it's sleet and wet snow, not causing too much trouble. Now for the far north of Scotland, Shetland in particular, there'll be some deep snow accumulating, especially on Tuesday night, risk of 5 to 10 centimetres by the end of the night, and that could cause further disruption, in particular for Shetland, where there is already considerable amount of snow. Elsewhere across the UK, clear spells by and large, and we wake up on Wednesday to a widespread frost. Temperatures could be as low as -12 Celsius for sheltered parts of northern Scotland, where we've got a bit of snow on the ground. Otherwise, bright skies for many, and we keep the sunny spells across central and eastern parts into the afternoon. However, there is an area of rain arriving from the west, and that will turn to snow over the hills of northern England and Scotland briefly, before milder air arrives for many on Thursday and Friday.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, good afternoon, wonderful people. It's just gone 4 o'clock. I'm Patrick Christys, and this is GB News. Here's what's coming up this hour. Gary Lineker appears to have got away with it, some would say. Yes, 1-0 Gary Lineker. The BBC has apologised to Gary, and he will be in the hot seat. Despite my best efforts, of course, on the alternative match of the day that I gifted to the nation at the weekend. But it's not all good news for the BBC. More controversy because Fiona Bruce apparently has decided to step back from her role as an ambassador to the charity Refuge. It's a domestic abuse charity. This is in relation to something she said on Question Time. I think it's a bit harsh, but we'll talk about that from one controversy to another at the Beeb. Of course, something else that's deeply controversial is the Conservative Party's illegal migration bill, which is going to be discussed, is being discussed now, actually, in the House of Commons. We'll go to that very, very shortly and bring you up to speed on all of it. So I'm Patrick Christys. This is GB News. I believe as well, very shortly, we're going to treat you to some of the absolute highlights of our alternative match of the day that we put together, cobbled together on Saturday night. Don't go anywhere. Yes, get your emails coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. How do you feel about the BBC essentially capitulating to Gary Lineker? Do you think it's the right thing? Should we all just move on from the whole thing now? But I tell you what, though, I mean, this guy, 1.35 million quid a year, people are saying he's overpaid. I think we can all agree that I would do it, rightly or wrongly, for a lot less money. Let's have a look.
This is the alternative match of the day, live on GB News with me, Mark Dolan, and Patrick Christys. Patrick, go easy on those crisps.
Salah, though, missed a penalty, slotted it into a different postcode, had more misses than Henry VIII this season, that lad. I mean, look at this guy here, Erling Haaland. I mean, he's just like a particularly muscular horse, isn't he? He looks like a Viking on the rampage. I stand by every word, every word. All right, I'm going to throw you over now to get your headlines with the wonderful Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you, and good afternoon to you. The top stories on GB News. 3 people have had to be taken to hospital after a suspected gas explosion in Swansea in Wales, with 1 person unaccounted for. Emergency services are at the scene after being called to the Morriston area this morning. Police say 2 properties have been extensively damaged and neighbouring buildings have also been affected. They've set up a cordon and are asking the public to avoid the area. Local council leader Rob Stewart told GB News teams are working to secure the site.
You're in the street here, you can certainly smell gas in terms of, the remembrance of the explosion. It's also disturbed the electricity supply in the area. This looks like a localised incident. And, certainly the area of Morriston is a modern area, and there's no suggestion of any sort of infrastructural issues at the present time.
Well, as you've been hearing, TV presenter Gary Lineker has been reinstated to Match of the Day after reaching an agreement with the BBC. That's after he was taken off air over a tweet on the government's illegal migration bill. The BBC Director General has apologised and said the corporation is now launching an independent review of its social media guidelines. The board has welcomed the move, saying impartiality is a cornerstone of the BBC. Speaking to the BBC, Director General Tim Davies said he took proportionate action.
I've always said we needed to take proportionate action. For some people, by the way, we've taken too severe action, David. Others think we're being too lenient. One of the joys of this affair is there's never been an easy solution, but asking Gary to step back off air was, I think, a significant thing. And now we look forward with this agreement moving forward to resolve things and get back to business as usual.
Well, former BBC executive and presenter Roger Bolton questioned why the BBC chairman hasn't spoken out on the matter.
Rightly or wrongly, Richard Sharp, because of his connections with Boris Johnson, because of the fact that he's been investigated for that relationship and what he revealed about it, and because he was almost totally absent, well, not almost, he was totally absent this weekend when the DG needed some help. He didn't step up, he didn't talk about impartiality, probably because he knew the second question people like you would put to him was, can we talk about your links to Boris Johnson?
Well, in other news today, the Prime Minister has pledged £5 billion over 2 years to the armed forces. Rishi Sunak met his Australian counterpart, Anthony Albanese, in San Diego ahead of unveiling a major new AUKUS defence project between the UK, the US and Australia. Plans to be announced with President Joe Biden include supplying nuclear-powered submarines to Australia. It was signed by the three nations in 2021 to boost defences and counter China's threat in the Indo-Pacific region. Here, doctors are mounting picket lines outside hospitals for 3 days of industrial action. The British Medical Association says junior doctors in England have suffered a 26% real terms cut to their pay since 2008. The union says newly qualified medics earn just over £14 an hour, less than some baristas in coffee shops. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says their demands of a 35% pay rise are unaffordable.
We're working extremely hard with NHS England and with hospital bosses to mitigate the impact of the junior doctor strike. That is why it's important that we engage in meaningful and constructive talks with them. We stand ready to engage with the junior doctors on that in exactly the same way we have with other health unions. And I urge the junior doctors to come and have those discussions as the other health unions have been doing, so we can pause the strikes and discuss those issues.
And a weather warning for Britain, which is set to be hit by further wintry blasts, with 51 flood alerts in place across the UK. The Met Office has issued a yellow warning for strong winds across parts of England and Wales, with gusts of up to 65 miles an hour forecast and travel disruption expected. In Scotland, yellow warnings for snow and ice are in place until tomorrow morning, as temperatures plunge to -8 degrees over the weekend. And lastly, King Charles and other members of the royal family have attended a service celebrating Commonwealth Day at Westminster Abbey in London. The King focused his speech on the theme of forging a sustainable and peaceful common future, saying a commitment to peace, progress and opportunity will sustain the Commonwealth. The annual reception will take place at Buckingham Palace later, with the Commonwealth Secretary-General, High Commissioners and other members of the Commonwealth community in attendance. That's all from me for now. Well, I'll be back in half an hour with my teeth in. Sorry about that.
Will she? Oh, I don't know. Anyway, right, OK, loads to get to then. So we start with a hugely embarrassing day for the BBC, who have now apologised to Gary Lineker after the dispute over his tweet about the government's migration policy. GB News understands that a number of BBC Sports staff are unhappy with the corporation's Director General, Tim Davie. BBC Sports is based in Salford, and employees are angry that Davie is not at the North West facility today. And the Beebs Director of Sport, Barbara Slater, is holding meetings with staff, probably as we speak, and one of the people who's attended a meeting with Slater has told GB News that the atmosphere is tense. So we'll bring you the latest on that. Now, Lineker will present Match of the Day this Saturday after missing the show over the weekend. His controversial tweet about Suella Braverman, where he compared her language to that used in Nazi Germany, led to a row over BBC impartiality, and many of Lineker's colleagues refused to appear on football shows on BBC television and radio. In fact, they actually replaced Football Focus with an episode of Bargain Hunt and The Repair Shop, fan favourites there. And then on Saturday night, the very much streamlined version of Match of the Day actually had 500,000 more viewers than the original version, so there we go. But the BBC will now conduct a review of its social media policy, and Davie says Lineker will abide by the editorial guidelines until that is complete. Let's cross over now to our national reporter, Ellie Costello, who is live from New Broadcasting House and will bring us the latest. Ellie, take it away.
Yes, good afternoon to you, Patrick. And Gary Lineker is off the bench. He will be back presenting Match of the Day this upcoming weekend. The BBC have worked very fast to get this deal brokered between the two parties, and he is going to be back on air. In a statement, Director General Tim Davie said, he sent an apology to staff, to presenters and to audiences for this difficult period in time. And he also announced that the BBC is going to launch an independent review into its social media guidelines. And there is going to be a focus in particular on freelancers who don't work in news and current affairs. Of course, that does refer to Gary Lineker himself. Tim Davie also recognised that there were grey areas in this social media policy that do need addressing. So we could see changes in the rules coming up in the next few days and weeks. Tim Davie did say that Gary has agreed to abide by the current social media guidelines whilst this independent review is taking place. But as that statement was given by Tim Davie, Gary Lineker was tweeting on his personal Twitter account just moments after that deal was announced. I'm going to share a little bit of those tweets with you now. He thanked his colleagues at BBC Sport for their support, their solidarity. He said he's proud to work for a fair broadcaster, but then he shares his final thoughts. This is in his tweet. However difficult the last few days have been, it simply doesn't compare to having to flee your home from persecution or war to seek refuge in a land far away. It's heartwarming to have seen the empathy towards their plight from so many of you. We remain a country of predominantly tolerant, welcoming and generous people. Thank you. So it is very interesting that just in those moments after that deal made the news, Gary Lineker did take the opportunity to double down on his comments that he made last Tuesday, those comments that snowballed into a row, really, over freedom of expression and BBC impartiality. It does seem quite clear that he stands firm by those comments, but he did say that he wanted to thank Tim Davie for his understanding during this difficult period. It does seem as though the two have reached a respectful agreement. But yes, Gary Lineker will be back on our screens on Saturday, and it seems, at least for now, Patrick, he's going to continue tweeting what he likes.
Yes, Ellie, thank you very much. Ellie Costello there, our national reporter, bringing you the very latest on that. Just going to delve very quickly into the inbox on this Gary Lineker stuff. I'm sick and tired and weary of this now, says Stephen. Yes, fair enough. Janet says, though, that she thinks as though you definitely broke impartiality guidelines. And I did say earlier on, because loads of you have been emailing me to say, I'm going to cancel my TV licence, and I wonder whether or not any of you actually do it. Well, apparently you do, because Tina's got in touch to say, good news, Patrick, I have cancelled my TV licence this morning, thanks to Gary Lineker and his comments about Nazi Germany. She has also then emailed me, inexplicably, some pictures of her dogs, which is always great. Not sure what the relevance is there, but you just keep it coming. Keep it coming, Tina. Anyway, joining me now is former newspaper editor and media consultant. It's Neil Wallace. Neil, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Is this a masterclass in how not to handle a situation in the media world from the BBC? Because I don't understand it. Gary Lineker supposedly broke some kind of impartiality guidelines. Now the BBC have ended up apologising to him, it would seem, having him back, and he's untouchable. He can have whatever he wants, can he?
It is indeed. I used to actually give lectures about how not to handle PR, and I think I'd have included this as a perfect example of how not to do the right thing and be seen to get it wrong. It is an extraordinary situation. The BBC have handled this catastrophically. They handled it, I thought, quite sensibly at the beginning when they said, well, look, this is so serious, we can't just continue as normal. But then they've been running backwards as fast as they can ever since. And they now have complete chaos, I would suggest, within their sports department, within almost anybody. How can you rein Gary Lineker in now? The next thing will have to be, they'll have to sack him, actually, because he will do it again. And then you've given this huge, huge amount of power to people who actually appear on the BBC to decide what the policy of the BBC is. You know, we think poor old Gary's a good guy. Let's all walk off air. Let's totally screw up our national...
well, just on that, Neil, just on that, OK, there is a lot of... I think ignorance when it comes to actually fundamentally it's the British taxpayer who really funds a lot of the BBC and pays the likes of Lineker's wages, etc. And that's all fine. And, you know, I think he does do a good job and there's no question of that. But then what I thought was fascinating was a situation emerged on Saturday, which the BBC did a massively stripped-back version of Match of the Day. It got more viewers, so it got about 500,000 more viewers. Yes, undeniably, unquestionably, some of that was due to intrigue, and one would expect that viewership to drop off if they just did that every single week. But I actually don't think it would drop off enough to maybe justify the vast cost of Match of the Day, the salaries of Lineker, Shearer, Ian Wright, etc. I mean, inadvertently, has Gary Lineker opened up an avenue here where the BBC could look at that and go, actually, are you worth our trouble?
I think it's a nice idea, Patrick. I don't think it will happen. I think the BBC's football coverage is pretty damn good, actually, most of the time. And that footage is generally shared out and sold around the world anyway. And it's broadcast elsewhere. But what you do have to, you cannot get away here from the fact that the BBC, by rolling over like this, have completely capitulated to pressure groups within the BBC. So we know that it's a hothouse of wokeness and snowflakes. What happens when they take a position about another political matter? Do the BBC roll over then? What I can tell you is this: there is a tremendous amount of coverage on the BBC and elsewhere in which his supporters have had a tremendous amount of air. Well, I'll tell you this. My friend and yours, Kelvin McKenzie, tweeted about this against Lineker on Saturday. He got 500,000 hits on that. 500,000. Nobody, as far as I'm aware, invited him onto BBC News to give the contra position to what Alistair Campbell was out there busily spouting. I got the second biggest reaction on Twitter I have ever had. Tens and tens of thousands, with a massive reaction, almost universally anti-Lineker, on the grounds of he abused his position. And I think he's now been allowed to get away with it. And I think that it's bad news for the BBC. They will regret this.
Well, it's fascinating stuff. Look, Neil, thank you very much, as ever. That's Neil Wallace there, who's former newspaper editor and media consultant. But look, Gary Lineker isn't the only BBC presenter in the news today, for very different reasons, it must be said. Fiona Bruce has stepped back as an ambassador of domestic abuse charity Refuge, following claims that she had trivialised domestic violence during a discussion about Stanley Johnson on Question Time. I think possibly quite unfairly, actually, it must be said, given from what I've seen. But let's go back now to Ellie Costello, who has got the latest on this. Ellie, thank you very much. Still outside New Broadcasting House for us. What's the latest on Fiona Bruce, then?
Yes, so this is all about last Thursday, an episode of Question Time, when Fiona Bruce intervened when a guest described Stanley Johnson, Boris Johnson's father, as a wife-beater. And they were talking about him potentially getting a knighthood in Boris Johnson's resignation list. And Fiona Bruce interjected when the guest described him as a wife-beater. And she told the viewers Stanley Johnson has not commented publicly on that. Friends of his said it did happen, but it was a one-off. And it was that one-off comment that was criticised then by women's charities, specifically Women's Aid, who called it unnecessary. They said even if abuse is an isolated event, which it rarely is, it should never be minimised. Well, Fiona Bruce has now stepped down as an ambassador for Refuge, which is a domestic abuse charity, and she's given a statement in the past few hours, and she said, last week on Question Time, I was required to legally contextualise a question about Stanley Johnson. Those words were taken as an expression of my own opinions, which they absolutely were not, and as minimising of domestic abuse, which I would never do. She said she faced a social media storm. She said that she was mischaracterised and she received personal abuse as well. She says that it's a hard decision, but she decided to step back as her role as ambassador, and she will support the charity from the sidelines instead. But it's very interesting because last week the BBC backed Fiona Bruce. They said that she hadn't used her own personal opinion in this context, and she had simply been explaining the legal contextual circumstances surrounding that comment. But it does raise again, doesn't it, Patrick, the issue and the complexities about wording and language when it comes to BBC presenters, not only on air but also on social media. We've seen it with Gary Lineker, we're now seeing it with Fiona Bruce, and although BBC impartiality is now going to be the absolute forefront of this independent review, it does show, doesn't it, just how difficult that is going to be to maintain impartiality at the BBC.
Absolutely. Ali, thank you very, very much. Ali Costello there, our national reporter, doing an epic stand outside New Broadcasting House for us. But the longest ever period of industrial action by junior doctors has begun and will last for 72 hours. So members of the British Medical Association will form picket lines outside hospitals in protest over conditions they say are threatening patients' lives. Let's cross now to the Royal Devon and Exeter Hospital and speak to our South West reporter, Jeff Moody. Jeff, what's going on?
Well, there doesn't seem to be any picket line down here. I'm not quite sure why that is, Patrick, but it is actually very quiet here. But we are hearing that there are picket lines right across the country, the largest strike in NHS history, as you say. We've heard that word a lot over the last few weeks, haven't we? But this one really is large because junior doctors make up 40% of the NHS medical workforce. Now, on other strike days, we've heard that people have stayed away from the NHS deliberately on those days. Not so today. A&E departments across the country have been as busy, if not busier than ever, and the slack has been taken up by senior doctors that have been stepping in for junior doctors who are on strike. Now, they're looking for a 35% pay rise. That sounds pretty whopping, you may say, but they're saying that they haven't had a pay rise since 2008 and that they need it backdated to that point because that's when inflation started to rise and they haven't had a rise in line with inflation. Well, Sir Keir Starmer has waded into the row today and said that they really need to sit down with the government. The government needs to sit down with the British Medical Association to discuss a way forward. The government says, well, we did ask if we could sit down with the British Medical Association, but unfortunately there was a condition attached. The government said they would sit down with them as long as they called off the strike in advance. And the junior doctors have said, no, this is our key card that we wish to play. We're not going to call off the strike in advance. We want to have the meetings and the discussions first. So this is getting to become tenser and tenser. 72 hours of industrial action is planned. We're nearly at the end of the first day. 2 more to go.
Well, indeed. Look, thank you very, very much, Jeff. Jeff Moody there, GB News' South West reporter. Just a bit of context on that as well. Yes, so we are now, nearly a third of the way through the junior doctor strike. I did see some rather interesting articles that apparently some patients' care will be better as a result of more senior doctors coming in to take care of patients. Obviously, that's not a long-term solution, of course. There was a line put out which was from the BMA, which was about if you started working as a barista in somewhere like a Starbucks or a Costa Coffee, etc., you would earn more as an hourly rate than you would starting out as a junior doctor. The argument against that, of course, is that if you then progress as a junior doctor, you would then become a senior doctor, possibly a consultant, etc., and you can end up earning rather a lot of money. When you heard those figures there, a 35% pay rise, and they want it backdated to 2008 because that's when, quotes, inflation really began. Fascinating stuff. What do you make of that? GBviews at gbnews.uk. And a little bit later, actually, we are going to be speaking, hopefully, to a junior doctor about that strike. So there we go. Get your views coming in. It might be interesting as well if I can maybe put some of your questions to that individual. gbviews at gbnews.uk. Now, are we on the brink of another major banking crisis? It's all light-hearted stuff here. Stock markets are down after the collapse of an American bank. I am Patrick Christys, and this is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
OK, welcome back, everybody. Now, HSBC has bought the UK arm of a Silicon Valley bank, or the Silicon Valley Bank, a private sale involving the government and the Bank of England. The UK branch went into insolvency last night after Silicon Valley's California-based parent company had its assets seized by US regulators on Friday. Our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, joins us now with On the Money. Take it away, Liam.
I've been hoping that this story would go away, Patrick, because it's basically a story about a bullet that we've dodged. Right. Silicon Valley Bank, a US bank that's lots of tech companies use it to stash their cash. You know, tech companies famously spend a lot of cash early on, so-called cash burn. And this bank has gone bust in America, and its UK subsidiary was rendered insolvent. So there's a rescue over the weekend, and the UK subsidiary was bought by HSBC, the biggest bank in Europe, which of course is also a British bank. And that means the tech companies in the UK that are using this bank, it's all fine. They can still pay their wages out. They can still pay their suppliers. It's just it will be with a different bank. Now, that's good news because the Treasury and the Bank of England did a rescue, or they arranged the sale, gave it its regulatory blessing and all the rest of it, no taxpayers' money. But, throughout the day, you've had the share prices of other banks in the US, not all of the banks, but smaller banks, they've started tanking. There are banks in the US where the share price is down 60, 75%.
How serious is this, then?
Well, we don't know. That's the point. And so I'm popping up on GB News every hour, just say, it's still OK, but we're keeping a watching brief on this, because I don't want viewers to think, oh, why didn't you tell us this was happening? And there is a lot of nervousness. At one point, the FTSE 100, the main index of shares here in the UK, was down by 4 or 5%, which is a chunky one-day fall.
Wow.
So there's no panic at the moment, but there are eyebrows being raised about the knock-on effects, the so-called contagion effects, the failure of this US bank, even though authorities here have said everyone who's deposited in the bank will get their money back. Authorities in the US have said the same things. There's no run on this bank because all the deposits are safe. Having said that, it's still causing nervousness because it's causing traders to look closely at other banks that have behaved similarly.
Well, obviously, we don't want to whip up a load of unnecessary
That's it, and I'm trying to be very responsible in what I say. I've been reporting this kind of stuff for 25, 30 years, so I have to be careful about what I say and what I know and what I don't know. And all I know at the moment is that the depositors of this bank on both sides of the Atlantic are safe, but I'm looking at the share prices of other banks and they're looking a bit ropey. Not the main high street lenders at all, not at all.
OK.
We mustn't deal in panic here, but I'm talking about some more regional, specialised banks in the US, where the share price has gone down quite a lot.
So definitely one to watch.
I'm keeping a watching brief on it, Patrick, which is why we're not talking about spam.
Which is why we're not... Well, can we a little bit? Go on, talk about spam. Talk about spam. In case you're just joining us, you take it away, basically. I like the fact that spam made a bit of a comeback. We were chatting off air. You do the context first, and then we'll talk about spam. Go on.
Well, we've been talking, haven't we, today about the ONS, and Office for National Statistics. The way it measures inflation, it tracks the price of about 750-odd different goods and services.
Yeah.
And over those years, those 750 goods, they change. And it turns out that they've announced this morning the goods and services that they've taken out and the goods and services that they're putting back in. And I'm not sure if we've got
we have words playing on talking about.
So the headline is that they've taken out things like Alco Pops, right? They've taken out cooked apples, like cooking apples, make your apple crumble, because not so many people are making apple crumble these days. And they've put in home security cameras, and they've put in electric bikes. They've taken out compact digital cameras because everyone uses their phone. It's kind of economics and sociology. It's indicative of how our life has changed. And as I was saying, when I was a kid, one of the key consumer goods was spam that was in there. Now it isn't. And bird's eye beef burgers. And when you were a kid, one of the key staples of Britain were chicken nuggets and fish fingers.
Absolutely.
So the things that we consume change, and the way they measure inflation changes over time. So it's now e-bikes all the way, but without Alco Pops.
Without Alco Pops. The two things have never
Sounds
mixed.
like a good night out.
It does sound it, actually, doesn't it? Yeah, I once ended up in A&E when I tried to get on an e-scooter, but there we go. Look, Liam, thank you very, very much. As ever, Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor. Right, still loads more to come between now and 6 p.m. Is Argentina going to invade the Falkland Islands again? Find out why the UK's relations with the South American country have taken a turn for the worse. And we will get the latest on the illegal migration bill, which is being debated in the Commons today. But first, your news with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you. The headlines this hour. 3 people have been taken to hospital after a suspected gas explosion in South Wales, with 1 person unaccounted for. Emergency services in Swansea are at the scene after being called to the Morriston area of the town this morning. Police say 2 properties have been extensively damaged and neighbouring buildings have also been affected. They've set up a cordon and are asking the public to avoid the area. TV presenter Gary Lineker has been reinstated to Match of the Day after reaching an agreement with the BBC. That's after he was taken off air over a tweet on the government's illegal migration bill. The BBC Director General has apologised and said the corporation is launching an independent review of its social media guidelines. The board has welcomed the move, saying impartiality is a cornerstone of the BBC. The Chancellor and the Bank of England had secured the sale of the collapsed Silicon Valley Bank UK to HSBC for the nominal sum of £1. The UK branch was put into insolvency last night after the California-based parent company had its assets seized by US regulators on Friday. Jeremy Hunt has confirmed all customer deposits will be protected with no cost to the taxpayer. And the Prime Minister has been pledging £5 billion over the next 2 years to the armed forces. Rishi Sunak met with his Australian counterpart, Anthony Albanese, in San Diego ahead of unveiling a major new so-called AUKUS defence pact between the UK, the US and Australia. Plans to be announced with the US President Joe Biden include supplying nuclear-powered submarines to Australia. And junior doctors are mounting picket lines outside hospitals for 3 days of industrial action. The British Medical Association says staff in England have suffered a 26% real terms cut to their pay since 2008. The union says newly qualified medics earn just over £14 an hour, less than some baristas in coffee shops. That's all from me. I'm back in half an hour.
OK, welcome back. Now, today is the first Commonwealth Day since Her Majesty's sad passing, and the first presided over by His Majesty King Charles III as King and head of the Commonwealth. Well, earlier this afternoon, the King delivered a message marking the occasion from the great pulpit at Westminster Abbey. The theme this year is forging a sustainable and peaceful common future. We can cross now to Westminster Abbey, and we're joined by GB News' royal reporter, Cameron Walker. Cameron, thank you very, very much for joining us. Yes, OK, well, a sad reminder, actually, of course, of the Queen's passing, but King Charles stepping in ably. What's happened? What's going on?
Certainly is, Patrick. I have the order of service right here in my hands, the first Commonwealth Day service of King Charles III's reign, and of course he is the new head of the Commonwealth. And one man who was inside the Abbey as a guest for the Commonwealth Day service is Professor Chris Imafidon, the chairman of Education in Excellence programme. Have I got that correct?
That's right, Excellence in Education programme.
Excellence Education programme, Chris. So thanks so much for joining me. First of all, you've been to a number of these Commonwealth Day services. What was the big difference for you having King Charles III as the new head of the Commonwealth?
He stepped forward. The last one we attended, we had the Queen sitting in the front row, and her speech was just in the booklet. But this time, the new king stepped forward to the podium, read out his speech, and it was directly from his heart, addressing the twin issue of global warming, or what some people will now call sustainability, and then pushing the agenda forward for the youths to be developed to their highest potential.
So let's take each one of the points that King Charles made in turn. First of all, sustainability and the environment. There was a big emphasis on that, wasn't there?
Absolutely, because remember the Commonwealth has a lot of island nations that are seeing the threat. They are not hearing about the threat. They are seeing visibly their land being overwhelmed by water. So it was a great thing he addressed that, because some countries may no longer exist if the rate at which things are moving continue in another 10 to 15 years.
He also talks about the 56 Commonwealth nations being united, and of course with the backdrop of the war in Ukraine and tensions across the globe, really. An important message, perhaps?
Yes, because you see, if we don't unite and we give a divided message, the world will be less peaceful. Unity comes and it begets what the people call common purpose, and that brings in peace. And you can see that we can share. There are a lot of things that we have in common that separate us. And here, he's really demonstrated that it's not just the linguistic bond that ties up 56 countries together. There are also cultural bonds as well.
And your background is education, and the King specifically mentions 1.5 billion people in the Commonwealth are under the age of 30, 60% of all citizens, quite a staggering figure. So I suppose a challenge for the King is to keep the younger generation engaged in the Commonwealth and indeed perhaps the monarchy.
Absolutely. And you see, he already has a template. He has a Prince's Trust, which already works with youths and people that are disenfranchised from the traditional educational system. So he can always roll that out and see that, you see, he's a conviction person. He's not just addressing it now. He knew it was coming and get all of his pension money from the army and dump it on the Prince's Trust.
Professor Chris, thank you so much for speaking to me on GB News. Well, of course, it is the final time, actually, we think, that all members of the royal family, senior members of the royal family, will gather in the Abbey before the coronation, which is going to be happening in just under 8 weeks' time. There is a big reception for the Commonwealth Day at Buckingham Palace this evening, and Buckingham Palace's ballroom has been made into a makeshift Westminster Abbey, so the King and Queen Consort can rehearse ahead of the big historic day in just under 2 months' time.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you very, very much. Cameron Walker there, our royal reporter. Now, this opens up a big debate for us, OK, because we are going to be debating very, very shortly about whether or not King Charles can keep the Commonwealth together. The Commonwealth has been under the spotlight for a very, very long period of time. A lot of people are saying, well, it's got historic, horrific ties to a bygone era and British imperialism, etc., etc. A lot of people are saying, well, hang on a minute, the Commonwealth actually loves being together and people should be quite grateful for it. And if anything, actually, us joining the European Union did quite a lot to damage the Commonwealth because it meant that freedom of trade, etc., between Commonwealth nations was hampered. So we're going to be talking about that, whether or not the Commonwealth should still be a thing. We'll go head-to-head on that very shortly. I'm Patrick Christys, and this is GB News.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, Chris Skidmore has joined fellow Conservative MP Caroline Nokes in announcing his opposition for the government's illegal migration bill. He said that he will not vote for it, which is usually what opposition means. The House of Commons is to hold the second reading debate on the new bill later today. It keeps being kicked into the long grass, and just last week, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, announced the legislation would allow for the removal of channel migrants from the UK. Under the proposals, those attempting to cross the water would be banned from future re-entry and blocked from applying for British citizenship. Braverman said the bill would push the boundaries of international law, but that it was needed to solve the crisis. And as we all know, it kicked right off as a result of this, the government being accused of all sorts, very much a polarising issue. I'm joined now by GB News' political reporter, Catherine Forster, who's going to give us the latest on this. Now, Catherine, as with all things government-related, this appears to have not taken place when it was supposed to have taken place. We're still waiting for the debate and second reading on this bill, aren't we?
Yes, it'll probably start in the next hour because basically there's now a ministerial statement on the Silicon Valley Bank. Obviously, that's a huge issue today.
Yes.
So it's been delayed. So it looks like being a long night for MPs who will no doubt have a lot to say about this bill. Now, obviously, Labour are opposed to it, the Lib Dems, the SNP, but amongst the Conservatives, quite a few not happy as well. I mean, it certainly will go through the Commons, but some on the right think it doesn't go far enough. Some, like Caroline Nokes and Chris Skidmore, very concerned about what it means for potentially detaining and deporting children or families. Now, I understand that no unaccompanied children would be detained or deported, but lots of concerns there as well. But the government really is in a hurry because last week they had the first reading. Already we're on to the second reading. Rishi Sunak is in a rush to get this through, if possible, by September through all stages, because, of course, 3 readings of the House of Commons, reports, committee, then to the House of Lords, where it's going to get taken apart. And he desperately needs to show some results, hasn't he?
Yes.
Hasn't he? Because he's hitched this to, you know, success at the next election, stop the boats. And so far, the numbers have just been going up and up and up.
Well, they have been going up. And, I mean, I suspect, so I don't know, but I suspect that if when the next election rolls around, he can at least say, we are stopping the boats, we haven't stopped them yet, then that would be some kind of electoral win. A lot of people are coming out against this, not least Gary Lineker, of course, but a lot of people in the Commons are coming out against this. Now, is their main issue here optics and the way that it looks in terms of it makes Britain look like a horrible little racist country? Or actually, is it genuinely about fears of morality and us potentially headbutting the line towards international law and breaking it?
Well, part of it certainly is the optics, but there are real concerns about what it means for us, because it's all very well saying if you come here illegally, you'll be sent packing, basically, to somewhere else, back home or wherever. But until you've got those legal, safe routes, you know, we do have a proud tradition of giving asylum to genuine asylum seekers. And at the moment, unless you're from Hong Kong or Ukraine or Afghanistan, those don't seem to really exist. So it certainly is problematic. But of course, the government's thinking is if they can reduce the pull factor, if it becomes clear to people that if you come here, you won't get asylum, you'll be booted out, then eventually people will stop coming. But of course, they thought that with, go back a year, Rwanda, we were going to put people on planes to Rwanda. That would stop people coming. And of course, not a single person has yet
Well, the thing
gone.
is, and part of this, thank you for this, Catherine. It's great to have you on the show as always, and for the insight and the raw political facts of all of this. Catherine Forster, our political reporter. Part of me does wonder whether or not, you know, the pull factor thing has already been removed by other countries, hasn't it? Which is why asylum seekers and refugees are desperate to come through other countries and get to us. So Claire Pearsall is a former special advisor to former Immigration Minister Caroline Noakes, and Caroline Noakes has come out and said apparently that she's not in favour of these. Look, thank you very much. We speak a lot about, don't we, about reducing this pull factor and the fact that that might make us terrible as a nation. But is the reality not that the other countries have got less of a pull factor, which is why people are desperate to come to us? So if we remove the pull factor, we would literally just be doing what everyone else is doing.
I think there is some modicum of an argument there for that. But realistically, the only way to claim asylum in the United Kingdom is to physically be in the United Kingdom. And the people that want to come here quite often will have families who are here and will speak the languages. But it's also important to note that we don't take anywhere near as many as places like France or Germany. They do take more than us. So I'm not convinced that the pull factor is solely just for the United Kingdom. I think if people are fleeing for their lives, then they will look to a safe country. It seems as if everybody wants to come here, but the data does not actually back that up.
Just on that, Claire, a lot of people now will be shouting at their TV screens going, well, France is a massive country, Germany's a lot bigger than us. You know, I mean, yeah, all right, they take more than us on paper, but per head of population, I mean, what are the figures like on that?
Yeah, we do take an enormous amount, but I'm not suggesting that we need to stop taking anybody. I think that this is a global problem. And if you actually broaden this out and you look to the wider international community, then you can come up with a plan that perhaps shares that burden equally across the rest of the globe. I know that Canada do take an awful lot of people from some of the Syrian camps and will continue to do so, but that isn't as widely publicised. I think the real problem with the United Kingdom is that at the moment it is so incredibly visible with people coming across the channel. Yes. Whereas 6 or 7 years ago, they were in the back of a lorry. It wasn't as visible, but was still an issue.
Yeah, and it's also the language on this, isn't it, now, about if you think that what's going on in the channel is a bit of an issue and migrant hotels are a bit of an issue and the money the taxpayers spending on it, if you just think that's a bit of an issue, you are now a Nazi, pretty much. And a lot of what people think, you're a far-right Nazi, which is bonkers, OK? And then the other side of it as well, and just to give it its due, you know, there are a lot of people, genuinely, as the Gary Lineker thing has exposed, there are a lot of people who, as far as I can gather, really do think that borders are a non-entity and we shouldn't have borders. And so, you know, those people do, of course, exist. But Caroline Noakes, someone that you know rather well, is planning on coming out against this, former immigration minister. What's her thinking here? What does she really want? Because some would argue maybe she should go and join the Labour Party if she's not happy with us.
Oh, well, she's been told that she should go and join the Lib Dems, and I've been told that I should go and join the Labour Party. So, you know, take from that what you will. But I think her main concern is the poorly put together policy, especially when you're looking at vulnerable women and children, pregnant women. There are no safeguards in place. You're looking at detaining these family groups. Unaccompanied minors will not be detained. But also, where are you going to put them? And that doesn't then solve the ultimate issue of where are you sending them back to? Because there are no agreements in place. And as a former immigration minister, she is more than aware that you need those agreements in place before you can do anything. So from my conversations with her, that's her main standpoint. The policy is bad. It's been made on the hoof and shouldn't go through.
All right, Claire, thank you very much. Claire Pearsall there, who was a former special advisor to the former immigration minister, Caroline Noakes. And, yeah, look, when Tom Harwood, our very own, asked Rishi Sunak to his face if he was up for the fight, Tom was talking about up for a fight with the lawyers about the ECHR, etc. I mean, he may well have to be up for the fight. He will have to be up for the fight, won't he, within his own party. It remains to be seen whether or not this government has got the bottle to stand by its convictions and try to do everything that it possibly can to sort out what's going on in the Channel, even if that means ruffling loads of feathers. But we're moving on slightly. We're moving north of the border, for want of a better phrase. SNP members have begun to vote for their new leader, Kate Forbes. Humza Yousaf and Ash Regan are all in contention to replace Nicola Sturgeon. The result will be announced after the ballot closes on March the 27th. Now, to get the inside track on the leadership battle, I am joined by Michael Simmons, who's the data editor at The Spectator. Michael, thank you very much. A choice, it would seem, between a lady whose Christian views apparently render her unable for high office in this country, a man who's been rubbish at every job he's ever had, and someone who isn't a household name in their own homes. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's certainly not an election of all the talents. As you've described, there's been all that has been said about Kate Forbes. Nobody knows who Ash Regan is. And Humza Yousaf has not had a great track record in government. And it's fascinating to see what this is already doing to the party and the wider independence movement. We track the independence polls on the Spectator's Data Hub, and it's now at its lowest level since 2018. I think there was a Sky poll today as well that was just near rock bottom. So the fact that Nicola Sturgeon's gone and there's not much love for these new candidates seems to be damaging the yes cause.
OK, this is great. This is why I like you, Michael. You are across quite literally all of the data. So it's taken a battering for independence, which is important for a lot of people, massively important. I do wonder how long it will take for that to recover, by the way. And when it comes to actually who is your favourite to be crowned the next First Minister of Scotland, how's that looking at the minute?
So this is a slightly difficult question because it depends where you look. If we look at the bookmakers' odds, they still favour Humza Yousaf to be the next First Minister. If you look at polling of all Scots and polling of SNP voters, Kate Forbes is well into the lead. But obviously, it's not all voters and all Scots that are having a vote in this election. It's SNP party members. And in the one poll we have had of SNP party members, Humza Yousaf is in the lead. And that really is because he is Nicola Sturgeon's anointed successor. The party machine is fully behind him. However, there's a third of voters on that poll undecided. So it's not a foregone conclusion that he'll win, but he is the favourite.
This is fascinating. And the next question leads me to say this. If Humza Yousaf wins, from what the data is currently showing at the minute, which is that actually, whilst he might be the most popular in terms of with the SNP party, he's not with wider Scottish public. So when we go to a general election, clearly that will have an impact. Which other political party do you think is likely to sweep up from the SNP if people go, you know what, I don't like Humza, he wouldn't have been my pick and I think he's naff?
So the logical answer to that is probably Scottish Labour. Their leader, Anna Sarwar, is quite popular, and they're sort of SNP voters who are naturally Labour voters but then wanted independence, who moved over to the SNP. And if they think that the independence is now not a likely outcome, they could go back to Labour. However, Scottish Conservatives have risen in the polls slightly as well. So
and if they do go to Labour, we've only got a second or two here, Michael, so sorry about this, but if they do go to Labour, that could have a massive bearing on the Labour's chance of winning a general election, couldn't it?
Yes, that would be huge. I mean, that could win them the UK general election.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Look, Michael, thank you. And it will not be long before we talk again, because I actually absolutely love your analysis. Michael Simmons there, who's data editor at The Spectator. Right, OK, so Gary Lineker has won his battle with the BBC. He will be presenting Match of the Day again on Saturday. And in just a few minutes, we will bring you a brand new interview with our Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. You do not want to miss that. What's he been saying? He's over in America, San Diego. I will not make the Anchorman joke. San Diego there to sign off on our AUKUS deals. Look, thank you very much, everybody who's been getting in touch as well. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Do you think the BBC was right to reinstate Lineker? Do you think that Gary Lineker was owed an apology by the BBC? So far, a lot of you are saying no, but I'll delve into the world of my inbox very, very shortly. And yes, hopefully in the next hour as well, we are going to bring you an update as and when that illegal migration bill gets its second reading in the House of Commons. Do you think that the government will have the bottle and the backbone to stand firm, or will it cave in? Especially as we're hearing there might be a little bit of a Tory rebellion on this. This is GB News. I'm Patrick Christys. Don't you dare move.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Patrick Christys here on GB News. I've got loads coming your way. So, Gary Lineker looks like he's back at the Beeb, doesn't it? Apparently, the BBC have apologised to him. He will be hosting Match of the Day on Saturday. Lots of people are saying that Gary Lineker wasn't owed an apology. Some people saying that he was. Where do you stand on all of that? Also, controversial times as well, again at the Beeb. Fiona Bruce stepping back from her role as an ambassador for the domestic violence charity Refuge for some comments that she made whilst doing her job on Question Time. We're also going to be hearing, get a load of this, from the Prime Minister himself, Rishi Sunak. He's in America looking to shore up the AUKUS deal with Joe Biden and the illegal immigration bill as well. What's the latest on that? It's going to get its second reading. Where do you stand on it? Do you think the government will stand firm and basically stick to what it's planning on doing, which is trying to stop these small boats? All of that coming your way and much, much more. It's Patrick Christys on GB News. Yes, OK, look, get your emails coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Do you think that the BBC were right to apologise to Gary Lineker? I'm coming round to the view that maybe they were, because they possibly saw my attempt at doing an alternative Match of the Day on Saturday night, which remains, by the way, the most fun I've ever had with my clothes on. Here's a little clip of it.
This is the alternative Match of the Day, live on GB News with me, Mark Dolan, and Patrick Christys. Patrick, go easy on those crisps.
Salah, though, missed a penalty, slotted it into a different postcode. Had more misses than Henry VIII this season, that lad. I mean, look at this guy here, Erling Haaland. I mean, he's just like a particularly muscular horse, isn't he? He looks like a Viking on the rampage. It's no wonder, is it, that Gary's back, ladies and gents. Anyway, right, OK, get your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Here's your headlines now with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. And the top story on GB News at 5:02. 3 people have been taken to hospital after a suspected gas explosion in Swansea in South Wales, with 1 person unaccounted for. Emergency services are at the scene after being called to the Morriston area this morning. Police say 2 properties have been extensively damaged and neighbouring buildings have also been affected. They've set up a cordon and are asking the public to avoid the area. Local council leader Rob Stewart told GB News teams are working to secure the site.
You're in the street here, you can certainly smell gas in terms of, the remnants of the explosion. It's also disturbed the electricity supply in the area. This looks like a localised incident, and certainly the area of Morriston is a modern area, and there's no suggestion of any sort of infrastructural issues at the present time.
Also in the news today, as you've been hearing, TV presenter Gary Lineker has been reinstated to Match of the Day presenting after reaching an agreement with the BBC. That's after he was taken off air over a tweet on the government's illegal migration bill. The BBC Director General has apologised and said the corporation's launching an independent review of its social media guidelines. The board has welcomed the move, saying impartiality is a cornerstone of the BBC. Speaking to the BBC, Director General Tim Davies said he took proportionate action.
I've always said we needed to take proportionate action. For some people, by the way, we've taken too severe action, David. Others think we're being too lenient. One of the joys of this affair is there'd never been an easy solution, but asking Gary to step back off air was, I think, a significant thing. And now we look forward with this agreement moving forward to resolve things and get back to business as usual.
The Prime Minister has pledged £5 billion over 2 years to the armed forces. Rishi Sunak met his Australian counterpart, Anthony Albanese, in San Diego ahead of unveiling a major new AUKUS defence project between the UK, the US and Australia. Plans to be announced in conjunction with President Joe Biden include supplying nuclear-powered submarines to Australia. It was signed by the 3 nations in 2021 to boost defences and counter China's threat in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, King Charles and other members of the royal family have attended a service celebrating Commonwealth Day at Westminster Abbey. And the King focused his speech on the theme of forging a sustainable and peaceful common future. The annual reception will be held at Buckingham Palace later. King Charles saying a commitment to peace, progress and an opportunity to sustain will sustain the Commonwealth.
Let ours be a Commonwealth that not only stands together, but strives together in restless and practical pursuit of the global common good.
His Majesty the King speaking there. You're with GB News. I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
Welcome back, everybody. It is 5:05. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Now, loads to get through, but first, we can hear from the Prime Minister, who's in the United States, to finalise a three-way defence pact with Australia and America. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, has just sent back this interview.
First of all, I want to talk about China. We've talked about the fact that China doesn't necessarily have to be on a set path. But isn't it fair to say if you're going to invest in nuclear submarines, if you're going to use some of the language that members of the Conservative Party, the language you've used in the past, actually it is going to make conflict more inevitable. It's going to create a backlash. It's going to feel to China like it's been isolated more.
Well, it's really important to note that AUKUS, the AUKUS partnership, is not about any one country, and I'm sure we'll come to talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. With regard to China, it's increasingly clear that China is a country that does have different values to ours. It poses a systemic challenge, and its behaviour is concerning. More authoritarian at home, more assertive overseas, and in light of that, it's right that we take the steps that are necessary to protect ourselves and to stand up for our values. So, for example, recently we blocked investment in a sensitive sector of our economy, in semiconductors, and people should be reassured that we will always do what is required to keep us safe.
So what do you say to your Conservative members, your backbenchers, who say you need to be tougher, you need to be stronger, you need to be more vocal when it comes to China?
Well, I'd say our actions demonstrate that we are doing what is necessary to keep us safe. We're blocking investment in sensitive areas of our economy, like semiconductors. We removed Chinese surveillance equipment from sensitive areas. We're passing new laws to ensure that there's transparency and accountability of money that's being invested into our universities and research establishments. And so those are all examples of what we're doing to keep ourselves safe. And I would also say is that our approach is completely aligned with that of our closest allies. America, Australia, Japan, Canada, all of us are on the same page in how we think about China, how we're approaching it. I spoke to Prime Minister Albanese from Australia about that last night. I'll be talking to President Biden about it later today. And I'd say to everyone, know that our allies as a country are all working together, we share the same view, and we'll act together.
Let's talk about President Biden, because you're also going to meet him later on today, aren't you? And you've had the Windsor Framework. It seems that people in Washington are now open to a trade deal, to reopen those talks. Are you open to that? You're going to suggest to President Biden that maybe you should take that out of the freezer and get an ambitious trade deal done with the US?
Well, I think that it was a great step forward for the people of Northern Ireland, first and foremost, for us to be able to conclude the Windsor Framework. I believe it will restore the balance of the Belfast Good Friday
Agreement. What about
trade,
though?
Now, look, with America is always, and has always been for a long time, our closest economic relationship. It's our single biggest trade partner. There are 1.5 million of each of us, Brits and Americans, to go to work at each other's companies every day. We sit together in lots of different ways. And trade, actually, with America grew last year by 15% already. Now, all of that is happening without a free trade agreement. So there's lots of things that we can do.
But surely you want one, and the Democrats and the Republicans now apparently seem open to one.
Yeah, I mean,
why not pursue that?
Well, because there's lots of different things that we are cooperating with America on when it comes to economic matters, particularly economic security, actually. That's a big priority of ours right now. It's something we talk about in the integrated review, is improving our economic security, and that will come by working closely with our allies. That's something that I'll be talking to President Biden about later today.
So it doesn't seem like it's on the table?
It's just, people should actually know that our relationship with America economically is very strong. Our exports are growing massively anyway, and we are concluding agreements with states. Remember, many American states are as big as most countries, and actually increasing our economic ties at a state level is something that can be really good for Britain and good for jobs, and so we're getting on and doing that.
Let's talk about immigration. Are you uncomfortable with some of the language being used with some within your own party when it comes to immigration, the rhetoric being used?
Well, I think when it comes to this matter, of course, tone matters. I've always been clear that what I believe we are doing is the right policy. It's also the moral and compassionate policy. Because at the moment we have a situation where people are being exploited by criminal gangs, people are needlessly dying, which is a tragedy, and we saw that recently off the coast of Italy, and we have a system where we can't target our generosity and our compassion, as we always have done, on the world's most vulnerable people, because our system is being overwhelmed with people coming illegally. So I believe what we're doing is absolutely the right thing to do.
The policy matters, but language matters in politics too. I mean, would you use the word invasion to describe what's happening?
I've been very clear about what I think is going on.
But would you use the word invasion?
Well, I think people can look at the language I am using.
So you wouldn't use. So what would you say to the Home Secretary who did use the word invasion?
The Home Secretary and I are aligned that this is the right policy to grip this problem. You know, we've got a situation where the number of people coming to the UK illegally over the past 2 years rather, has gone up by 4 times. That is the scale of what we're dealing with. We are now spending £5.5 million a day on hotels.
You don't feel uncomfortable with the Prime Minister using the word invasion?
I don't think anyone can look at that and say that that is a sustainable situation, especially when people are dying. Now, we have always been a compassionate, generous, welcoming country. 500,000 refugees from Ukraine, from Afghanistan, from Syria, from Hong Kong have been welcomed to the UK over the past few years. No one can say that we are not a generous country, but it's got to be that that is done legally, that it's done fairly. At the moment, that is not happening, and we are not able to help the world's most vulnerable people. That is not a situation that is justifiable. The moral and compassionate thing to do is to break this cycle, and that's what our policy will do.
Just very finally, on the BBC, there's lots of arguments, and there'll always be arguments about impartiality around the BBC, but there is an argument about funding the BBC. That's the reason that people care about impartiality. As long as you're Prime Minister, there's a Charter review coming up, is the licence fee going to be the way the BBC is funded?
Well, there's actually a review going on about the right way to fund...
In principle, though...
Well, no, hang on. There's a review that is examining all the options. The whole point about doing that is to go through all the options and figure out how can we ensure that the BBC, which is a rightly treasured national asset, is going to be in a sustainable position going forward, that it can continue to compete with media companies around the world as the way that we consume our media changes. You know, as those things evolve, it's right that we examine the funding model of the BBC to make sure that it is in the strongest possible position to do the job that we all want it to do, because it is rightly a national institution and we want it to remain strong not just today but for years into the future.
Okay, Prime Minister, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Well, there we go. That was our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who I think we can all agree has got one of the best jobs in the world, travelling all over the globe. And he was interviewing Rishi Sunak there about a wide-ranging group of things, including, of course, the BBC. And on that, the BBC have had a rather embarrassing day again. They've apologised to Gary Lineker after the dispute over his tweet about the government's migration policy. Now, GB News understands that a number of BBC Sports staff are unhappy with the corporation's Director General, Tim Davie. BBC Sports is based in Salford, and employees are angry that Davie is apparently, anyway, not in the North West today. Lineker will present Match of the Day this Saturday. After missing the show over the weekend, his controversial tweet about Suella Braverman, where he compared her language to that used in Nazi Germany, led to a row over BBC impartiality. Well, many of Lineker's colleagues refused to appear on football shows on BBC television and radio to show solidarity with the presenter. And, in fact, people were terrified of agreeing to cover for him in case they were called either a scab or a Nazi. But the BBC will now conduct a review of its social media policy, and Davie says that Lineker will abide by the editorial guidelines until that is complete. The BBC's Director of Sport, Barbara Slater, is holding meetings with staff today. Let's go now to our national reporter, Ellie Costello, for the latest live from New Broadcasting House. Ellie, take it away.
Hi, Patrick. Yes, Gary Lineker is off the bench and he will be back presenting Match of the Day this weekend. A deal was reached between himself and the BBC. This statement from Director General Tim Davie this morning, he apologised for the difficult period for staff, for presenters and for audiences. And he announced as well that the BBC is going to launch an independent review into its social media guidelines with a focus on freelancers who don't work in news and current affairs. That is, of course, Gary Lineker. He also appreciated and recognised the fact that there are grey areas in that social media policy that do need addressing. He said that for the meantime, Gary is going to abide by the current social media guidelines whilst that independent review takes place. But having said that, within minutes of that news breaking that deal had been reached between Gary Lineker and the BBC, Gary Lineker was back on his Twitter page tweeting a thread in which he thanked his BBC Sports colleagues for their solidarity. He said he was proud to work for a fair broadcaster. But then he went on to share what he could describe as a final thought. And this is the tweet. It says, however difficult the past few days have been, it simply doesn't compare to having to flee your home from persecution or war to seek refuge in a land far away. It's heartwarming to have seen the empathy towards their plight from so many of you. We remain a country of predominantly tolerant, welcoming and generous people. Thank you. So it is very interesting, Patrick, that almost instantly after that news broke this morning, Gary Lineker took the opportunity to double down on those comments that he made last Tuesday that snowballed into this row in which he was taken off air and BBC impartiality was called into question. Also questions too about freedom of expression and freedom of speech. But he made it clear he stands firm by those comments. So yes, perhaps there will be changes ahead for BBC freelancers, especially if they're not working in news and current affairs. Gary Lineker will be back presenting Match of the Day on Saturday, and at least it seems he is going to continue to keep tweeting what he likes.
Well, Ellie, thank you very, very much. Now, I've just had an email in from Jackie who says, please, will you let Ellie go home now? It's starting to get dark and cold. She's been outside the BBC all day, so I think Ellie can consider herself released now, back home. Right, now, as you know, GB News is, of course, the People's Channel, and this show would be nothing without you lot at home. So joining me is GB News viewers Brian Dugan from Solihull and Dan Bryan from Beverley. Fantastic stuff. Now, Brian, I want to start by talking to you about this because the Gary Lineker stuff has rumbled on. It's been an absolute lesson in how not to handle something from the BBC. But people are saying that essentially Gary Lineker has basically got away with it. What's your views on this whole saga?
I don't think at all, Patrick, that he's got away with it. I mean, got away with what? Expressing his view. You can disagree with the view, but if we're a country that doesn't want freedom of expression, then I think that we should say that, because
does that change, Brian? Can I ask you? Does that change when you sign a contract somewhere? So this is kind of where I'm at with it, which is I'm completely all for freedom of speech, and I've got nothing. I vehemently disagree with what Gary Lineker had said. I've got no problem with the fact that he said it, unless, of course, we as taxpayers pay him £1.35 million a year, and a condition of that is that he signs a contract to say you can't tweet stuff like that. I mean, if he's broken that contract, then that is an issue, Brian, is it not?
No, I agree with you, Patrick, and I think you've summed it up well. I agree with you in terms of if you disagree with Gary's view, you're entitled to. Now, in terms of the contractual situation, you're perfectly entitled to raise that as well. But I would suggest to you that perhaps that isn't the case, because if that was the case, then he wouldn't be working for the BBC this Saturday. So I think it's the grey area that exists, which Tim Davie has acknowledged in his statement today, which obviously needs to be aligned or realigned, if you like. And that's really the fundamental issue, which I agree with you entirely, Patrick. I think Gary Lineker, for me, people can distinguish between Gary Lineker presenting Match of the Day highlights on BBC from Gary Lineker, citizen, expressing a personal view about a political subject. It wasn't Hugh Edwards or it wasn't Laura Kuenssberg who was tweeting that.
Dan, I'll bring you in now. Dan Bryan there from Beverley. Now, what's your take on this? The latest development is that essentially Gary Lineker has been given a bit of a sorry. Will be back at his normal job, presumably alongside everyone else who walked off in solidarity with him. And the BBC, as we understand it, is going to try to clear up that grey area. Just your take on the overall situation, Dan.
I think the more we allow these people to speak, the more they reveal themselves to be the absolute hypocrites that they are. I mean, to work in television, as you probably have experienced, Patrick, you know, you have to have a certain level of spinelessness or more faces than a town hall clock. You know, the people that you have to work with and you have to kiss along to get along with. These people they sway with the wind, and their opinions contradict themselves as they go further on. But the thing is, we have record of this because they say one thing 2 or 3 years earlier, and then they contradict themselves as their opinion changes. So as long as we can see that as viewers, then we can make our own decision on whether to watch them or not.
Yeah, Dan, I mean, the fascinating thing, no one ever leaves the BBC to go and pursue a career as a centre-right broadcaster, do they? So we kind of all already knew where the Beeb was on a lot of stuff, OK? But I think, Dan, before I go back to Brian on this, Dan, do you find it quite laughable how people have decided to make such a big stand on this? Because, look, I don't know about this, but do you think Alan Shearer really has a deep moral conviction about what's going on in the channel? I would be quite surprised. I can't help but wonder whether or not he thought, well, if Gary Lineker goes here, then I might also be out of a job and people might realise that maybe we can put together some kind of new dream team. What do you think about all of that, Dan?
Don't forget, we're dealing with people whose brains are in their feet. That's where their talent lies. And that's about it. So they tend to stick together when it's a bit like in the schoolyard, you know, one person says one thing and they all go, yeah, that. So it's that kind of mentality that we're seeing. And also don't forget, where was Gary Lineker when the government was implementing authoritarian dictatorship kind of measures during COVID? Where was he?
Qatar.
He was backing it all. So they weren't Nazis then, apparently, but he disagrees with their immigration policy and now they're Nazis. So really, he's a hypocrite.
Look, Brian, I'll bring it back into you. Now, I am reliably informed, Brian, that you have been involved, loosely speaking, with the football industry in the past. Is that right? Am I along the right lines there, Brian?
That's true, yes.
Yeah, so and you in communications as well, for example. So what did you make, really, of the way that some football clubs decided to supposedly go into bat for Gary? So we will not be doing any interviews as a result of this. Do you think that was more damage limitation from them, just not wanting to have to pass comment on the migrant crisis? Or do you think it was genuine solidarity with old comrade Lineker?
Yeah, well, I'm not so sure that he's comrade Lineker, and Dan's... while Dan is perfectly entitled to express a view as well, to suggest that Gary Lineker's brains is in his boots is absolute and utter nonsense. And it's sanctimonious twaddle at its very height as well. He's a very intelligent guy, as it happens. He took over from Des Lynam, presenting Match of the Day. Desmond Lynam is rightly regarded as one of the pivotal figures in sports journalism. And Gary Lineker, for more than 20 years, has made the job his own. So to say that his brains are in his feet, I think you might want to maybe have a wee rethink a little bit about that.
I'll go to you in a second, Dan.
In terms of solidarity, Patrick, which is the question you put to me, it's absolute genuineness. And it's genuineness not only from his immediate colleagues in terms of the pundits whom you referred to, Alan Shearer and Ian Wright, but it was throughout the business. It was the commentators who also, and this is where the BBC got it so blatantly wrong, in terms of they didn't realise that people work as a team, and people not who have the same view on everything, but people who understand that freedom of expression is either a cornerstone of democracy in this country or it is not. And they stood with the person who decided that he was going to make a stand on this particular issue. And the football clubs did the same, not through anyone having similar politics, but holding to that cornerstone.
You think it was a freedom of speech thing, yeah?
And that's what it was.
OK, all right. Brian, just before I go back to Alan, just on this then, and quite quickly, the fact is, it's all very well and good saying that Gary Lineker is an intelligent guy. Undoubtedly, Gary Lineker is a very intelligent guy. There's no doubt about that. And he is a very good presenter, OK? The thing, I'll go to you in a minute, Dan, you'll have your say. But the thing I would argue about this is that their viewing figures went up by 500,000 when he and no other presenter was there. And as far as I'm aware as well, there wasn't even particularly much commentary. I mean, so actually, is it quite hard to justify the fact that the BBC have now decided to apologise and reinstate them all, Brian?
Well, clearly not. Right. The BBC have made that decision. And I think you'll find that there was a lot of people rubbernecking on Saturday night to see how it looked without the pundits and the presenters there. It was a bit of a novelty. And for some people, they will have wanted that on Saturday night and said, yeah, that wasn't bad, but that wouldn't be the way forward. And the BBC wouldn't have its broadcast rights from the Premier League if that was the way forward.
All right, Dan, I'll throw it over to you. What should the BBC have done then? Because when you are confronted by, essentially, a strike, by a lot of people, a lot of big names, right across the board, pretty much, I mean, what should the BBC have done? Because in the defence of Tim Davie? I mean, he couldn't sack them all, could he?
Well, I don't think anybody should lose their job for having an opinion. That's exactly it. It's if we live in, like your other colleague was saying, the cornerstone of society is free speech in a democracy, then you shouldn't lose your job over your opinion. However, the BBC are struggling at the minute because they're trying to appear to be impartial when, of course, everybody knows they're not. So they have to appear to be doing something about it. And I think that's what the lip service is with the statement that was released today. Brian, you're right. I've never met Gary Lineker. My opinion is based entirely on what he says, both on Twitter and when I see him on television. And from that, I have deduced that he isn't as bright as what you think he is, because of the rank hypocrisy. Being able to hold two opposing views in your head at the same time is quite palpable when you see it.
OK, look, both of you, thank you very much. Sorry, lads, we're going to have to leave it there. We're going to have to leave it there. Yes. All right, we'll have you both back on very soon. Thank you very much. Right, chaos. Right, that was GB News viewers Brian Deacon from Solihull and Dan Bryan from Beverley, who I think it's fair to say will not be friends going forward, but you love to see it. Now, should junior doctors have gone on a 3-day strike? I am going to ask one of them very, very soon. You're not going to want to miss that, actually. Some interesting questions being posted. Junior doctors going on a 3-day strike. They're already on it, as a matter of fact. I'm Patrick Christys. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Right, Right, welcome back, everybody. Now, today marks the start of the longest ever period of industrial action taken by junior doctors and will last for 72 hours. Members of the British Medical Association will form picket lines outside hospitals in protest over conditions they say are threatening patients' lives. Let's now speak with NHS junior doctor. It's Dr. Vivek Trivedi. Thank you very much, Dr. Vivek. OK, so how does walking out help patients' lives?
Well, walking out is just a tool that we've been forced to use to have our voice heard with the government. We've been crying out about our pay and how it's been eroded by more than 26% over the last 15 years, and the knock-on effects that's been having. It makes doctors feel undervalued, and that's driving doctors away, whether they're leaving the country altogether or leaving the NHS into things like business, digital tech, financial tech. We're not able to retain the highly skilled professionals we need to be able to deliver a good quality of care for the patients.
If you knew that the pay was so bad, why did you decide to go into that line of work?
Yeah, so we hear that quite often, actually, and it's not something that's happened overnight. This has been a gradual build-up and a gradual.
But that's why.
Sorry,
just talk to me about. That's why I'm a bit confused. Is because you said it's been going on for 26 years or whatever. It's been eroded. You look quite young. You're junior doctor, yeah. So I just don't understand why, knowing all of that, why you would try to go into something if you knew that the pay was so awful.
So the pay's got worse as things have got on, and we see how that manifests. We see the poor standards of care that leads to. Anyone who's been working in the NHS, even for more than 1 year, who's been able to see a change in the way that morale is within staff, and how that leads to poorer standards of care. So the waiting list that patients have to wait on for elective procedures or appointments now exceeds 7 million. That's 7 million people in the UK who might not be able to work, who might not be able to walk around, who might not be able to live life to their fullest ability because we're not able to do the care that we need to. And ultimately, that's because we've got a huge workforce crisis. So it's estimated that there's between 8,000 and 9,000 doctor vacancies in the hospital. And the GMC, which is the regulatory body that overlooks doctors, expects there to be 16,000 more vacancies by 2030. So we need to do something to stop this from happening.
And the crisis of patient care, in your view, goes away if we start paying doctors more. What are you on at the minute?
So I'm a doctor I've been working for 7 years. I'm on £24 an hour. I'm an anaesthetic doctor where I work in anaesthetics and intensive care. So I look after critically unwell patients when they come through the door, having to put tubes into their mouth to help them breathe for them, and help, look after them whilst they're on organ support. This is, it's grueling. These are the people that are the sickest of the sickest in the hospital. And it's just not commensurate with the level of workload that we undergo.
And what do you want to be paid then?
So all we're asking for is our pay cut that we've had over the last 15 years to be reversed. And what that looks like is a new doctor who's starting with £100,000 a day after they've gone to university for 5 to 6 years, who's on £14 an hour. We want them to be paid £19 an hour. And at the very senior end, doctors who've been working for 10 years or so, who are currently paid £28 an hour, we want them to be paid £38 an hour. Now, that's not a tall ask for the government. That will cost them roughly £1 billion, and we know they've spent far more than that for unusable, faulty PPE.
I get that.
They were just considering.
Yeah. I understand that. I just got to put this to you, though, because you keep talking about a pay cut and things. And the NHS as a whole has had a real terms 39% funding uplift, real terms, since 2010. Is it all very well and good directing anger and strikes at the government, which affects patient health? But maybe, just maybe, you'd be better looking within the NHS at some of your management and saying, where are you spending all of this money? Could we be less wasteful? And actually, could you actually manage the NHS better? Or are you not willing to do that? You're just going to plough ahead and say, we just need a pay rise, and that'll sort everything out.
So there's a couple of things going on. I'm not sure where that number's come from. I'd love to see it myself. But, when we ask doctors why they're unhappy and why they're wanting to leave the NHS, the number one reason is pay. The BMA undertook a survey just before Christmas in which, alarmingly but not actually surprisingly, there was 40% of respondents were ready to leave the NHS and were going to do so when they found a new job. More than two-thirds were actively thinking about leaving the NHS. If
you stay in your current role and you work your way up, right? This is the argument against it, isn't it? Which is all very well and good saying that you do an incredibly difficult job, and you do. There's no doubt about that. Absolutely not. But if you stick around doing what you're doing now, you can end up on very good money with, let's be honest with you, Vivek, a cracking pension, a pension that a lot of people in the private sector would kill for. OK, and so is that not part and parcel of professional life, starting on a very low down salary or a lowish salary and having to put a lot of hard graft in and then working your way up to being on a good salary? Is that not what you're just doing?
Well, there's a couple of things about that. One is that actually the NHS pension isn't what it used to be. I appreciate it's helpful, but it's not what it used to be. But the main thing actually is it's not a free ride to become a consultant or a GP. It takes a lot of work, and you have to pass specific competencies, exams, which we have to fund ourselves. And not everyone gets there. People don't always progress, and some people burn out and drop out. So the prospect of something in the sacrificing something now for the prospect of something in the future isn't a strong argument. And then if we think about what a consultant actually makes, they're on, about £44 an hour or so. These are doctors who've worked. I know this. It's an average around 120 grand a year, right? Which does sound a lot more impressive than the figures. Well, it is because I've just done it. Well, it's not incorrect at all because we had the figures earlier on. So I mean, that's what it is. And we had when we were discussing about a potential consultant strike. That was what we were discussing about last week. But yes, that is quite a lot of money for people. I think, is it not? So a new consultant earns around £88,000. And that's after, more than around 10 years or so of full-time, which in the NHS is more than full-time for the rest of the country because we do, on average, 48 hours a week. Like I mentioned, multiple exams, which we have to fund ourselves. But, it's a grueling and rigorous training process. You wouldn't want any, Tom, Dick and Harry to become a consultant. You want the best of the best. And so that if we want the best of the best, then we need to pay them like the best of the best. Otherwise, they're going to leave. And that is the crux of the issue.
OK, look, Dr Vivek, thank you very, very much. I did enjoy that back and forth. Dr Vivek Trivedi there, who is an NHS junior doctor. Right, OK, better late than never. We are going to go over now to get your latest headlines from the wonderful Polly Middlehurst. We've got loads more coming your way, but we'll just rush over to the headlines now, I think.
Patrick, thank you very much indeed. The top story today. 3 people have been taken to hospital after a suspected gas explosion in South Wales, with 1 person unaccounted for. Emergency services are at the scene after being called to the Morriston area of Swansea this morning. People say 2 properties have been extensively damaged and neighbouring buildings have also been affected. Police have set up a cordon and are asking the public to avoid the area. Local council leader Rob Stewart told GB News teams are working to secure the site. TV presenter Gary Lineker has been reinstated to Match of the Day presenting after reaching an agreement with the BBC. That's after he was taken off air over a tweet about the government's illegal migration bill. The BBC Director General has apologised and said the corporation's now launching an independent review of its social media guidelines. The Prime Minister has told GB News the move is a positive step.
There's a review that is examining all the options. The whole point about doing that is to go through all the options and figure out how can we ensure that the BBC, which is a rightly treasured national asset, is going to be in a sustainable position going forward, that it can continue to compete with media companies around the world as the way that we consume our media changes. As those things evolve, it's right that we examine the funding model of the BBC to make sure that it is in the strongest possible position to do the job that we all want it to do, because it is rightly a national institution and we want it to remain strong, not just today, but for years into the future.
And Rishi Sunak was speaking in San Diego, where he pledged £5 billion over 2 years to the armed forces. The Prime Minister met with his Australian counterpart, Anthony Albanese, ahead of unveiling a major new AUKUS defence pact between the UK, the United States and Australia. Plans to be announced with the US President Joe Biden include supplying nuclear-powered subs to Australia. And as you've been hearing, junior doctors have staged their first of 3 days of industrial action as they mount picket lines outside hospitals. The British Medical Association says staff in England have suffered a 26% real terms cut to their pay since 2008. The union says newly qualified medics earn just over £14 an hour, saying it's less than some baristas in coffee shops. That's all from me. I'm back at the top of the hour. See you then.
Hey, welcome back. Now, Argentina has been accused of placing the Falkland Islands in an economic stranglehold after it ripped up a key cooperation agreement and demanded fresh talks on the island's sovereignty. Now, it comes as islanders mark the 10th anniversary of a referendum vote to remain British, and crucially rather a long time after we won a war there. Our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, has more.
Across the Falklands, they're marking a decade since they voted by a staggering 99.8% to remain British. Although overseen by international observers, the results of that referendum have never been recognised by the Argentinian government. 7 years ago, Buenos Aires and London effectively agreed to disagree over the island's sovereignty and signed up to a pact aimed at improving economic, environmental and social relations. But this week, all that ended as the Argentinians ripped up the agreement and demanded fresh talks over the future of the Falklands.
We're always disappointed with the reaction from Argentina, but we're not at all surprised. It's something that we've come to live with, and we understand them very, very clearly. When the economy and when the political situation in Argentina gets tough, then we are the sort of whipping boys from their point of view.
The Argentinian economy is in meltdown. Critics of the government in Buenos Aires accuse it of reigniting the row over Falkland sovereignty to distract from its domestic troubles. On a practical level, though, any withdrawal from the cooperation agreement will hurt the islands.
It has impacted the Falklands because we can't share fisheries data with Argentina because of the migration of the fish stock in the ocean. We've lost a flight to Sao Paulo, which was our second link to South America. And also the agreement benefited Argentina because it helped identify the war dead from the war. So I don't really think anyone comes out better from this agreement coming to an end.
With more than 1,000 British military personnel, Typhoon fighters and a Royal Navy presence, the Falklands is far better defended now than before the war in '82. No one here believes Argentina has the slightest interest or indeed capability to threaten the islands militarily. But for the time being at least, it seems determined to ramp up the diplomatic and economic pressure despite the express wish of this island community. Mark White, GB News.
Yes, well, there we go. Right, OK, now it's been reported that an Afghan migrant, who was deported from the UK earlier, serving half his time in prison for raping an underage girl, is trying to claim asylum back again in the UK. He says the government's illegal migration bill will not deter him. It is quite a shocking story, to say the least. Now we'll have it all right here on GB News very shortly.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
OK, ladies and gentlemen, in just a matter of seconds, we're going to take you live to the House of Commons, where I believe that Suella Braverman is about to make a statement in relation to the illegal migration bill, and that's getting its second reading as we speak. And we're going to go now.
Priority. It's why the Prime Minister made stopping the boats one of his 5 promises to the British people. And it's why, according to the opinion polls, the British people back this government's bill. They back this government's bill by more than 2-1. This does not mean, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as some assert, that the British people are xenophobic. Since 2015, the British people have provided refuge to nearly 500,000 people through global, safe and legal routes. The British people are fair, compassionate and generous. Millions of legal migrants, including my parents, have experienced this warmth firsthand. But the British people are also realistic. They know that our capacity to help people is not unlimited. Since 2018, some 85,000 people...
Secretary of State for Giving Way, does she think the British public want to see pregnant women and children detained in immigration detention centres? I do not believe for a minute that they do, but that's what's in this bill.
The British people want to see people... They want to stop people dying on the Channel. That's what this is about. It's naive to suggest that it's lawful and appropriate to make this journey. People are dying and we need to stop it. Since 2018, some 85,000 people illegally entered the United Kingdom by small boat, 45,000 of them last year alone. They have overwhelmed our asylum system. Local authorities simply do not have the housing or the public service capacity to support everyone. The British taxpayer to the lady.
I thank the Home Secretary for giving away.
I thank the Home Secretary for giving away.
I thank the Home Secretary for giving way so early in her speech. Is she satisfied personally that there is enough provision for vulnerable children in the proposals that she's putting forward tonight?
It's in detail, but yes, vulnerable people will be receiving appropriate safeguarding and welfare support. The British taxpayer cannot continue to fork out £6 million a day on hotels to house illegal arrivals. Now, let's be honest. The vast majority of arrivals, 74% in 2021, were adult males under the age of 40. The vast majority were not pregnant women. The vast majority were not young children. All travelled through safe countries like France, in which they could and should have first claimed asylum. Many came directly from safe countries like Albania. And when we try to remove them, they turn our generous asylum laws against us to thwart removal. This system.
Thank you. I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. Does she agree that when 70 Labour MPs, including the Leader of the Opposition, signed a letter campaigning for the release of dangerous foreign criminals who we want to remove from the UK, they expose themselves as pro-open borders and unlimited immigration and put themselves on the side of the criminal rather than the side of the criminal?
Well, my honourable friend puts it very well. What we have here is naive do-gooders who would rather campaign to prevent the removal of a foreign national offender, one of whom went on to tragically kill another, than vote in favour of our measures that would have toughened up the sanctions on foreign national offenders. I'm going to make some progress. The reality is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that this system is simply unfair. It's unfair on the most vulnerable. It's unfair on those who play by the rules. It's unfair on the British people. So we must change the law and we must stop the boats. Now, Mr. Speaker, for too long, those of us voicing concerns about the effects of uncontrolled, unprecedented and illegal migration have been accused of inflammatory rhetoric. But nothing is more likely to inflame tensions than ignoring the public's reasonable concerns about the current situation. The public are neither stupid nor bigoted. They can see firsthand the impact on their communities, and it's irresponsible to suggest otherwise. And speaking of acting responsibly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to put something on the record. It's perfectly respectable for a child of immigrants like me to say that I'm deeply grateful to live here, to say that immigration has been overwhelmingly good for the United Kingdom, but that we've had too much of it in recent years. And to say that uncontrolled and illegal migration is simply bad.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. Does she agree with me that in the last couple of years, where we've seen exponential growth in this human trafficking coming across the channel, that actually what's happening is the money that people who can ill afford to spend on these criminals is being used to make their trade even more effective, putting yet more lives in danger?
My right honourable friend puts it very well. We have now a sophisticated, well-resourced, multi-billion-pound trade of illegal people smuggling and human trafficking. It is pan-national and it needs to stop. But to say, I'm going to make progress. It is, and yet, Mr. Deputy Speaker, despite our reasonable concerns that we have raised on several occasions, like my right honourable friend, the member for Whittam, before me, I am subject to the most grotesque slurs for saying such simple truths about the impact of unlimited and illegal migration. The worst among them, poisoned by the extreme ideology of identity politics, suggests that a person's skin colour should dictate their political views. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will not be hectored by out-of-touch lefties or anyone for that matter. I won't be patronised. I won't be patronised on what appropriate views for someone of my background can hold. And I will not back down when faced with spurious accusations of bigotry. Mr. Deputy Speaker, when such smears seep into the discourse of this chamber, as they did last week, accusations that this government's policies backed by the majority of the British people, are bigoted, are xenophobic, or are dog whistles to racists, it is irresponsible and frankly beneath the dignity of this place. Politicians of all stripes should know better, and they should choose their words carefully. Mr. Deputy Speaker, those that cast their criticism to this bill in moral terms ignore certain truths. Firstly, they ignore that we have a moral duty to stop the boats. People are dying in the Channel. They are taking journeys that are unsafe, unnecessary, and unlawful.
Point of order.
OK, well, that was Swallow Braverman there, who is pulling absolutely no punches in the House of Commons as a result of this illegal migration bill and its second reading. She said, quite categorically, she will not be lectured to by out-of-touch lefties. Someone who definitely isn't an out-of-touch lefty is, rather ironically, sat on my left at the minute. It's Michelle Dewberry. She's coming your way shortly with Jubes and Coat. Michelle,
Hello.
wow.
Well, I've got to say, I wondered how she might approach today, because there's been a lot of criticism about language. Let's not forget that was Lineker's point, wasn't it? The language that was used. So I thought, I wonder if she'll tread carefully and err on the side of caution. But judging literally just on those last few minutes alone as well, no.
She's
the answer
got
to
a set of cojones on her, hasn't she? I mean, fair play to her. She stands up and says all that all the time.
That could be misinterpreted,
No,
but yes,
I'm over that now.
she is absolutely not messing around. She's doubling down. She believes what she thinks, and she's not having anyone, it would seem, trying to dissuade her.
Right,
And you know what, by the way? It's about time we had some politicians with some robust principles. Whether you agree with them or not is kind of neither here nor there, but it's so much flip-flopping around in politics, hasn't there?
Yeah, it does. Well, look, if you like what you hear there, no doubt there'll be more of that coming your way in the next hour. Michelle Dewberry with Jubes and Co. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll be back again for tomorrow at 3 p.m. Peace out.
Oh, yeah.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app, and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Jubes & Co. Now, talk about going from 0 to 100. Junior doctors are in disputes with the government over what else? Pay. And what are they asking for? Just a mere 35% pay rise. And to twist the government's arm, they've gone on strike, get this, for 3 days. They're out of the cancer wards, out of maternity units, and out of accident and emergency. Should it be allowed? I've got a sneaky suspicion tonight that our guests will definitely disagree on that. And ever since Brexit, Britain is on the hunt for trade deals. But at what cost? Well, the Trade Minister for the United Arab Emirates says if you want to trade with us, then you've got to button it about human rights. So if we want to win people over around the world, should we basically stop lecturing them about their human rights records? And Home Secretary Suella Braverman is on the march again. She's telling the police to stop recording the names of people accused of non-crime hate incidents. Police should be protecting free speech, she says. And she singled out the case of the teenager in Wakefield who was added to the police files after scoffing a copy of the Quran. Has Suella got it right? We'll have all of that to come and more. But before we do that, sorry. Sorry about that. Anyway, as I was just pondering, we have indeed got a lot to get through tonight. We've got two fantastic guests alongside me, and we'll be getting into other things as well, such as, for example, Gary Lineker. What an absolute